All right. Sorry. When the meeting, I am leave to rejoin just on channel. Then the end meeting for all. So that's what happened. Sorry about that. Okay. So we were discussing the socialist school. So we are coming to socialist school. So Malthushian theory, he just identified the resources as the reason why there is several issues or several constraints on the population and the environment relation, and because of that, population could population could grow, but beyond a point there could be crisis. Now, on the other hand, the socialist school is looking at the society as such. So that's more of a social theory. So they're identifying the social structure, the nature in which the society is organized. And in the Europe, it is basically a capitalist world. So this capitalist school or capitalist structure is the reason why there are several issues that leads to population growth. So population should also be studied from based on the structure. The structure is influencing population growth, and that should be studied. Idana is socialist school. So basically, socialist school is basing on a capitalist critic. They are looking for a critique of capitalism, or they are looking into a critical view of capitalism, its evils, the different factors that capitalism is associated with: capital accumulation, labor demand, wage rates, like surplus labor, the rich poor divide. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനെയുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളെയാണ് ഈ socialist school നോക്കുന്നത്. And the most famous person to do this was, of course, Karl Marx. Okay, Karl Marx was the person to basically carry out this study in the most prolific manner. So within this socialistic school, within the criticism of capitalism, it has also a demographic background. Demographic understanding is there. So when you talk about in the initial part, we have different theories. We study about demographic theories. So in this context, the second theory that we look at is the Marxian demographic theory, Marxian population theory. Okay. Now, just like when Malthus said there is resources are a factor that influence population growth, Marx identified the existing structure, or rather the capitalist structure, is responsible for population growth. So how did he identify that? So he said basically the capitalist society is comprised of two group of people. Which are the two classes? Okay, the labor class is there and the capitalist class is there. So two group of people are there, and there is huge divide between both these. So basically, I theory explains here what is basically how Marx is connecting capitalism with theory, and then we'll write and further details. So that approach we can follow. So there are two group of people. Now, when you look at each of these groups, both are different. Capitalist people are those owns the mode of production. They owns the mode of production, and they produces value, goods and services, and then they goes for capital accumulation. So their profit and their affluence also keeps on increasing. On the other hand, if you look at the labor class, the only commodity they have is what the only commodity they owns is the labor. So they have hands to work. So those hands to work or that capacity of work is what they own, which is a just a single component of the capitalist production system. So all they can do is that only commodity they possess is labor, and they will try to when the poverty increases, when the misery increases, they will try to increase what the working hands. So the commodity അവരുടെ ഉള്ളത് വർക്ക് ചെയ്യാന്നുള്ള ഒരു capacity മാത്രമാണ്. So they will increase the the population working hands എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ working ഉള്ള capacity their only product and ownership is on labor. So they'll try to increase the labor force available. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു വീട്ടിലാണെങ്കിൽ പോവർട്ടി കൂടുമ്പോൾ എന്താണ് കൂടുതൽ മക്കൾ ഉണ്ടാകും. And that the philosophy is that what കൂടുതൽ ആൾക്കാരുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ you can earn more income to the family, and thus improve the standard of living. So this process will lead to what more and more population growth. So the labor class is where the population explosion is basically happening, and that is happening why? Because of the exploitative nature of the capitalist system. So whenever the wage rate, whenever the wage is low, people will start to produce more and more children. Okay, the production rate will increase. Now, when more and more children is produced, more and more population is coming into workforce is coming into the market, what happens? The demand would be lesser than the supply of labor force, because ഒരു ഡിമാൻഡ് ഉണ്ട്. ഒരു ഫാക്ടറിക്ക് 10 പേരുണ്ടാണെങ്കിൽ 10 ആൾക്കാരെയായിരിക്കും വേണ്ടത്. So that is there. പക്ഷേ because of poverty, people will be having more children. So 10 പേരെ വേണ്ടടുത്ത് maybe we will be having 10 or 15 laborers. And when that condition arises, നമ്മളിപ്പോൾ ഇവിടെ നേഴ്സുമാരുടെ കാര്യം പറഞ്ഞ പോലെയാണ്, കൂടുതൽ നേഴ്സുമാരുണ്ട് and people are not giving wages, right, proper wages എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ പോലെ, you know what, when the demand is less than the supply of labor force, wage rates further declines. Wage rates പിന്നെയും കുറയും. Wage rates കുറയുമ്പോൾ എന്താ സംഭവിക്കുക? പിന്നെയും the number of population growth rate or number of the rate of production എന്താണ് growth rate of population will again increase. So in this way, you go into a cycle where the income of, or rather the capital accumulated by the capitalist class will increase, whereas the population as such is kept on increasing by because of the poverty and misery faced by the labor class. This ഈ ഒരു തിയറിയാണ്, ഈ ഒരു കണക്ഷൻ എസ്റ്റാബ്ലിഷ് ചെയ്യാണ് ബേസിക്കലി നമ്മുടെ മാർക്സ് ചെയ്തത്. So if you look at capitalist class, they owns the modes of production. And this leads to exploitation of labor class and capital accumulation. Through profit maximization. And thus they own more modes of production. Whereas the labor class, only commodity of production is labor. They try to increase what population, increase in population to, you can say, for in search of better standard of living. This leads to what? Creation of reserve army. What Marx called it to be the creation of industrial reserve army, meaning what? Basically surplus surplus labor force. So this would lead to what? A situation where demand for workers less than what the labor supply. This will lead to what? Fall in wage rates. Wage rates will decrease when the situation happening. So here's a mismatch. This is a situation of mismatch, and this mismatch will lead to falling lowering of wage rates. Lowering of wage rates will further lead to what? Increase in population, because again 10 രൂപ കിട്ടുന്നിടത്ത് വേജ് റേറ്റ് കുറഞ്ഞ് 9 രൂപ ആയി കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ the family standard of the search for standard of living is still incomplete. So the family will go for more and more what more and more what you call as reproduction and more hands of work, hands to work for, hands to feed them. So that's what's happening. And this what when this fall in wage rates will also be beneficial for the capitalist class because they can generate more what profit from the declined wage rates. So this is a situation that is happening in the capitalist society. This is what Marx was highlighting. Marx is highlighting this position, and this is what is leading to the demographic crisis in European countries. ഇതാണ് Marxian theory. And to solve this issue, to solve this, we need to replace the current system with a community oriented, community centered structure which can maximize welfare of working class. So this is his idea of communism. ഒരു എന്താ പറയുക സെൻട്രലൈസ്ഡ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു ക്യാപിറ്റലിസ്റ്റ് സ്ട്രക്ചറിനെ റീപ്ലേസ് ചെയ്ത് കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി ഓറിയന്റഡ് ആയിട്ട് വർക്കേഴ്സ് തന്നെ ഓൺ ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരു അടുത്തുള്ള കാര്യമാണ് കേരളത്തിലാകുമ്പോൾ കേൾക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നില്ല ഒരു കമ്മ്യൂണിസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്യുക. ആൻഡ് ദിസ് ഈസ് ഓൾസോ ഹി സീൻ ആസ് ഈ കമ്മ്യൂണിസ്റ്റ് സിസ്റ്റം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് is one where full employment is realized and standard of living is also achieved. Higher standard of living is also achieved. ഈ ഒരു സിറ്റുവേഷൻ ആണ് എന്താണ് മാക്സിന്റെ സൊല്യൂഷൻ. So just like Malthus had identified resource as a constraining factor, Marx is identifying affluence, the difference in affluence or rather standard of living as the reason behind the population situation. So capitalist class will not be having much of population growth. They'll be having lesser kind of population growth. But on the other hand, what the labor class, because of their peculiar condition, will be going in search of more and more population, more and more hands to feed. That will lead to population explosion. And this system is basically what basically the function of capitalist structure, the exploitative nature of capitalist structure, and then to solve this issue of working class, the issue of poverty, the issue of rapid population growth and explosion and associated miseries. So always population growth in a misery ആയിട്ട് തന്നെയാണ് കാണുന്നത് അല്ലെ. Population increasing and standard of living is decreasing. And to remove or to solve this issue, this situation, you need to have a radical change in the structures that are existing. That is what his solution is. So there is a difference. Malthus was giving preventive checks or rather positive checks as the main solution. But he was not talking anything about the structure that was existing. On the other hand, Marx is identifying the structure to be the issue. And when you reform the structure or replace the structure, you can solve the issue without the population condition going into a crisis. Right. മനസ്സിലായോ? ഇതാണ് പുള്ളിയുടെ ബേസിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള തിയറി. So basically he is trying to achieve an economic theory or a structural theory whereby the structure can such structure can explain the functionalities between or the correlations between the economic system and population growth. All right, so we will write this. ഈ ഒരു പിക്ചർ ഒന്ന് വരയ്ക്കണേ. I'll give you a moment to draw that. First we'll write some introductory paragraphs and then we'll draw the picture and explain the theory. മനസ്സിലായോ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞ കാര്യങ്ങൾ എങ്ങനെയാണ് പോപ്പുലേഷനും ക്യാപിറ്റലിസ്റ്റ് സ്ട്രക്ചറും ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് കിടക്കുന്നത് എന്നുള്ളത്? Okay, so the factor is the affluence here. The affluent society, the more affluent society will be having less population, but the more affluent will be having less population and misery, but the less affluent, the poor people, will be having high population, right? So the point we are making is that the population, population is a burden, right? Population is mostly seen as a negative thing, but in Indian context, especially overpopulation and everything. So when you look at why this population is an issue, it's basically a function of several factors. One, there is a factor of resources. അതുപോലെ വേറൊരു ഫാക്ടറുള്ള അഫ്ലുവൻസ് ആണ്, അതുപോലെ വേറൊരു ഫാക്ടറുള്ള ടെക്നോളജിയാണ്. ടെക്നോളജിയിലേക്ക് നമ്മൾ വരും. സോ population, when we look at population, population of a place, population of a country, if you have to figure out like if this population, this particular number is a good thing or a bad thing, there are different points of view to that. Okay, so Malthus is looking at it from a resource perspective. So basically, നമ്മളിപ്പോ എല്ലാവരും population ഒരു burden എന്ന് പറയുന്നതിന്റെ ഒരു കാരണം resource perspective ആണ്, whereby you say that there's a resource shortage because of overpopulation. Maybe there's not enough place to live. Like India നോക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ it's highly crowded. So you would say population is a burden with respect to resources. Or maybe you'll talk about what land, food, fuel, all these things are becoming costly because of overpopulation. Now there's other perspective to it. On the other hand, you can say affluence as a major factor. Right? Why our cities are so crowded? Because there is so much of inequality in our cities. Slums are there because property and housing areas are cornered by the rich and the black market. So whereby affordable housing is not available because of the affluence, right? The rich lives in a very luxurious manner, whereas the poor has nothing to live with. So the purchasing power, the standard of living of the poor is very low. That's not because of the population per se, or maybe because of the population, but not just because of the population. There are other factors at play, right? The affordability, the low wages. India is not a poor country as such. It's a rich country, but there is a difference in its affluence. The rich is super rich and the poor is super poor. And that's the reason why we see that population is a burden. So it's a different perspective, right? Affluence is a second perspective. You are seeing it from a resource perspective. You are seeing it from a affluence perspective. Now you'll also see what is a technology. What is technology doing? So the basic debate is that population. When you are looking at population, what are the factors to consider? So resources or factor, and second factor we are looking at is affluence. And basically Marxian theory is looking into the factor of affluence, right? Another example to give is that environmental degradation. If you look at environmental degradation, does the poor countries pollute the environment more or the rich countries? What do you think? When you talk about global warming, climate change and everything, is it the poor countries or is it the rich countries or the developed countries?
Developed countries.
Okay. Yeah. Participant country. Okay. Developed countries. Yeah. So if you look at any metrics, you can see that the per capita emission, the carbon intensity of the economies, everything, the ecological footprint, some of the highest ecological footprint. Ecological footprint, it's a concept where how much of Earth is required to meet the demand of human population. ഇപ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് ഈ ഒരൊറ്റ ഒരു എർത്ത് കൊണ്ട് നമുക്ക് ഹ്യൂമൻ ഡിമാൻഡ്സ്, ഇപ്പൊ നമുക്കൊരു ഫുഡിന്റെ ഡിമാൻഡ്സ് ഉണ്ട്, ഫ്യൂവലിന്റെ ഡിമാൻഡ്സ് ഉണ്ട്. And we are often seeing that the resource utilization by human beings is beyond the capacity of ഒരു എർത്തിന് ഒരു വർഷം പ്രൊവൈഡ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്ന കപ്പാസിറ്റി അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എമൗണ്ട് ഓഫ് റിസോഴ്സിനേക്കാൾ കൂടുതൽ നമ്മൾ യൂസ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. ആൻഡ് ആ വഴി നമ്മൾ റിസോഴ്സ് ഡിസ്ട്രോയ് ചെയ്യുകയാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. സോ ആ ഒരു കൺസെപ്റ്റാണ് ഇക്കോളജിക്കൽ ഫുട് പ്രിന്റ്. ഓക്കെ, ഇക്കോളജിക്കൽ ഫുട് പ്രിന്റ് ഒക്കെ നോക്കുവാണെങ്കിൽ ഇന്ത്യയുടെ വളരെ കുറവാണ്, ആഫ്രിക്കൻ കൺട്രീസിന്റെ ഒക്കെ വളരെ കുറവാണ്. ബട്ട് ദി developed world, countries like UAE, very huge water utilization, inefficient water utilization, inefficient energy utilization. For example, the fuel, gasoline eaters are US economy. US economy is like gasoline, oxygen dependent on gasoline dependent on like gasoline or petroleum, right? So that's the issue here. Affluence is a major issue. Even if you look at the case of China, we say like China is the biggest polluter now. So കഴിഞ്ഞ ദിവസം ഒരു ഇന്ത്യൻ ഹിസ്റ്റോറിയന്റെ ഒരു സ്പീച്ച് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, ലൈക്ക് ബോറിസ് ജോൺസനെ ക്രിറ്റിസൈസ്, വെസ്റ്റിനെ ക്രിറ്റിസൈസ് ചെയ്തുകൊണ്ട് ഇച്ചിരി വൈറലായിരുന്നു. അതിനകത്ത് ഈ പുള്ളി കാര്യം പറയുന്നുണ്ട്. ബിക്കോസ് even when you say like China is the biggest polluter, China is the biggest polluter because it's a factory of the world. Chinese goods are what aids for the affluence of the West. Okay, അപ്പം നമ്മൾ പലപ്പോഴും ചൈനയാണ് പൊല്യൂട്ടിംഗ് എന്ന് പറയുമെങ്കിലും ചൈന ഇത് പൊല്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത് ഈ US-ലും യൂറോപ്പിലും ഉള്ളവർക്കൊക്കെ അഫ്ലുവൻ്റ് ആയിട്ട് ജീവിക്കാൻ വേണ്ടിയാണ്. സോ പലപ്പോഴും ഈ അഫ്ലുവൻസ് ഓഫ് ദ റിച്ച് ഈസ് ദി ഇഷ്യൂ വൈ population is becoming a burden or overpopulation ഉള്ള ഐഡിയ വരുന്നത്, or rather maybe the affluence of the rich and what the poverty of the poor. Poverty is also leading to environmental degradation. When you are bloody poor, you will go for what the most subsistent way of living, and the most subsistent way of living would always be falling back on environment. When you don't have money to buy an LPG cylinder, you will go for deforestation. You will cut down trees, chop down trees, and use that. Right. So when you don't have what other resources, you will pollute the river bodies, the water bodies that are there. So resource illa, so you will not be able to keep the region hygiene. You will throw things into the lake and then pollute that and then destroy the lake. So affluence is a major factor. Affluence decides our capacity to deal with environment and how population can be characterized. Population can be characterized as negative thing or maybe a positive thing based on the affluence. So that's the Marxian theory is saying. It is raising limelight, or putting limelight onto the capitalistic structure and the difference of affluence that is causing population changes in a society. Okay. Right. So we'll write that. Okay, we'll start with an introduction. Socialist writers have traced. Socialist writers have traced overpopulation and associated miseries. Have traced overpopulation and associated miseries to the shortcomings of overpopulation and associated miseries to the shortcomings of capitalistic social order. Social order characterized by maldistribution and poor organization of resources. The social order characterized by maldistribution and poor organization of resources. So that's the key part. Like Malthus was saying what resources are finite, right? And resources are limited, and that will then lead to crisis. But Marx is not saying that. The Marxian idea is not about the limitedness or finiteness of the resources, but rather the disproportionality, or rather the maldistribution of resources. Resources undo illa ennalladalla. Resources are always there. The rich will get more and more resources, even when when poor are reeling under famine conditions. The rich will be living in a more easier, comfortable way. So we know that, like even in the COVID situations, when the poor people and the other groups were severely affected, we were seeing the riches of the rich people growing leaps and bounds, like the wealth was growing. Okay, so there's a maldistribution of resources and there's a poor organization of resources. Those who are in dire requirement, dire need of, dire necessity of resources are not getting any kind of resources. And they are relatively deprived year after year, right? So that issue, poor organization of resources. Karl Marx is one such scholar. Karl Marx is one such scholar who developed a scientific interpretation of human history and developed a strong reaction against capitalism. Strong reaction against capitalism. Although he didn't postulate any separate theory of population. Although he didn't postulate any separate theory of population, his writings have, although he didn't postulate any separate theory of population, his writings have definite demographic undercurrents. Writings are definite demographic undercurrents. Next paragraph. Marx has beautifully linked various variables of capitalistic system like capital accumulation, demand of labor, surplus population, wage level, fertility, etc. Fertility, etc. through causal mechanisms. So basically, how they are interrelated. That has been understood. That has been described. So,
sir, wage level, fertility, etc.
Yeah, through causal mechanisms. So through cause effect mechanisms.
Okay.
Causal cause effect. So this one. This is basically what we are talking about. So there are different variables. Capital system there is the idea of capital accumulation, surplus, creation of industrial reserve army, demand of labor declining, or rather demand supply mismatch, fall in wage rates. So this has been the contribution. Understanding this different variables and associating it with fertility or demographic process has been the contribution of Marxist studies. Okay, ഇതൊന്ന് ജസ്റ്റ് ഈ ഒരു ഇവിടെ ഇതൊന്ന് വരയ്ക്കാമോ? ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞുതരാം, നമ്മൾ ഏതൊരു തിയറി പഠിക്കുമ്പോഴും, മോഡൽസ് ആൻഡ് തിയറി പഠിക്കുമ്പോഴും, മോഡൽസ് ആൻഡ് തിയറിയിൽ വാട്ട് യു കോൾ അസ് ആ തിയറിയുടെ ഡീറ്റെയിൽസ് എഴുതുക എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലല്ല ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ വരുന്നത്. തിയറി ഒന്ന് ബ്രീഫ് ചെയ്യണം, മാക്സിമം 20 മാർക്സ്. So basically this question will be asking upon discuss the demographic transition or demographic theory of Robert Malthus and analyze its present day relevance. എന്ന് ചോദിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഒരു 15 മാർക്കിന് 20 മാർക്കിന് ചോദിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ മേ ബി ഒരു 1 പേജ്, മേ ബി 1.5 പേജ് മാക്സിമം, അതിൽ കൂടെ നമ്മൾ തിയറി ഡീറ്റെയിൽ ആയിട്ട് എഴുതേണ്ട കാര്യമില്ല. Then what we are focusing on is what the analysis of this theory, all those parts. So these kind of crisp understanding. ഈ ഒരു തിയറി ഇങ്ങനെ എക്സ്പ്ലെയിൻ ചെയ്യാമെങ്കിൽ you can easily The point I'm making is that we must be able to explain a particular theory. For example, Robert Malthus's theory, like ഇത്രയും വാക്കുകളിലൂടെ we have explained this theory. So in this way, in a real brief manner, we must be able to explain any theory. So our level of brief ആയിട്ട് brevity ഉള്ള understanding നമുക്ക് achieve ചെയ്യണം. So that's what മാർക്സിന്റെ theory നമുക്ക് ചുരുക്കി പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഇങ്ങനെ പറയാൻ പറ്റും. Okay, ഇതൊന്ന് വരയ്ക്കണേ. Capitalist society, capitalist system, labor working class, and the different aspects. വരച്ചായിരുന്നോ? We need time. വരച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞല്ലേ? Okay. No. So Marx's idea that like the circumstances of society is a function of what is the historical materialistic approach of Marx. So അതിനു മുമ്പുള്ള ഒരു philosophy was like basically so condition of society was a function of various the rulers. Rulers in thought എങ്ങനെയാണെന്നുള്ളതാണ് simply put, very simply put. So in historical materialism, he identified that the materialistic conditions, the living standard, what the population or all those factors are function of what the structure, the organization of economy, the structure that is governing them. അപ്പൊ അതിന്റെ ഒരു ഹിസ്റ്റോറിക്കൽ നേച്ചർ എങ്ങനെയാണ്, അതിന്റെ ഒരു ഓവർ എ പീരീഡ് ഓഫ് ടൈം അത് എങ്ങനെയായിരുന്നു. So it's always time dependent, historical materialism, and the conditions of material conditions of society is a function of how the different variables, how this organization of society has been achieved in time, and that will reflect on the materialistic condition of the society. So that's the idea of historical materialism in the Marxian idea. Simply put, it's a more complex idea, but very simply put, നമുക്ക് അതിന്റെ തിയറിയിലേക്ക് പോകേണ്ട കാര്യമില്ല. So yeah, we'll write. Following the historical materialistic approach, historical materialism, following a historical materialist approach, Marx identified that the capitalistic society consists of capitalist. നമ്മൾ ഇത് ഇപ്പൊ പറഞ്ഞ കാര്യത്തിന്റെ ഒരു ഡിസ്ക്രിപ്ഷൻ ആണ് കേട്ടോ, നമ്മൾ എങ്ങനെ ഒന്ന് എലാബറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യണം. So we'll write a real cube. The capitalist society consists of two major classes. Two major classes hyphen. The rich and affluent capitalistic class capitalists and the rich and affluent capitalists and the poor workers. Paragraph. The capitalistic class own the mode of production, modes of production. The capitalistic class own the mode of production and earn surplus. The capitalistic class own the mode of production and earn surplus by exploiting the labor class. To the idea of profit maximization. So this is basically free market system and to the philosophy of profit maximization. And thus this profit led to further capital accumulation, with the capitalistic class. So basically, Marx is of the idea whoever controls the modes of production will control the society. Okay, and who does not own the modes of production will suffer. So that's the idea. So profit led to further capital accumulation with the rich population or the capitalistic class, and that's what's happening there. What's happening is that the rich are cornering the modes of production more and more. So more than if like they control modes of production now, when capital accumulation happens, they'll acquire more and more such modes of production. Finance is one of the major modes of production or factors of industry or capitalistic activities, right? So they will have more and more investable money, and they will corner that. Whereas in response, the poor labor class. So in response to the capital accumulation, the poor labor class tries to accumulate labor. The only commodity it possesses, the only commodity it possesses. Through rapid population growth. So labor so they want to live better life, and for that they will go for more population, more family members. The only commodity it possesses through rapid population growth. Marx considered the creation of surplus population. Marx considered the creation of surplus population as increased population growth will lead to increased population growth will lead to increased growth of population will lead to oversupply of labor oversupply of labor than the labor requirement or labor demand in the market, labor demanded by the market. So oversupply of surplus labor because oversupply of labor than the labor demanded by the market. All right. Such a surplus population subsequently becomes industrial reserve army. Such a surplus population subsequently becomes industrial reserve army of unemployed and semi-employed population. Industrial reserve army of unemployed and semi-employed population. Paragraph break. Presence of such an industrial reserve army leads to further fall in wage rates. Presence of such industrial army leads to further fall in wage rates. Marx believed that there exists an inverse relationship between wage rate and population growth rate. Wage rate and population growth rate. Full stop. The class of workers who are more prone to become part of the industrial reserve army, IRM is who are more prone to become part of the industrial reserve army shall have much lower wage rates and thus higher and subsequently higher population growth rate. So poor are turning more poor will tend to more children, more bigger families, and thus the growth rate will be increasing in that segment. The poor section of the population has higher population growth rate, or rather larger families are found among the poor, right? Next paragraph. Thus the Marxian law of population, Marxian law of population is peculiar. Thus, the Marxian law of population is peculiar to the capitalistic social structure. And through this theory, Marx refuted the law of Malthus. Thus, Marx refuted the law of Malthus that there can be a universal or natural law of population. So Marx Malthus was saying what this idea of gap between resource and population would be occurring in every society and will thus govern the population growth rate in every society. But Marx refuted the law of Malthus that there can be a universal or natural law of population. Marx inferred that every method of production, every method of production or structure has its own peculiar law of population. Right. So ഓരോ സ്ട്രക്ചറിൽ ഓരോ കാര്യങ്ങളാണ് ക്യാപിറ്റലിസ്റ്റ് സൊസൈറ്റിയിൽ ഉള്ള പോലെ ആയിരിക്കത്തില്ല ഡൈനാമിക്സ് ഇൻ അതർ പാർട്സ് ഓഫ് സൊസൈറ്റി എന്നൊരു ഐഡിയ ആണ് മാർക്സ് പറയുന്നത് ബിക്കോസ് ദിസ് കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് capitalist labor class relationship and this resultant increase in population cannot be seen in a different society. That's what Marxian thought is, right? And Marxian propositions can also be written. Malthus's proposition നമ്മൾ കണ്ടിട്ടുണ്ട് preventive and positive checks. So according to Marx, or population, poverty, misery. According to Marx, or population, poverty, misery, etc. are not natural inevitabilities. Oh, these are not natural inevitabilities, but manifestation of the evils of capitalism. But the manifestation of evils of capitalism. Thus, he strongly advocated social reforms and social reforms on the lines of social reforms on the lines of radical dismantling of the capitalistic setup. In favor of full dismantling of capitalistic system in favor of communism. Marx advocated that a commune-centered method of production, a commune-centered mode of production would give full employment and living standards to all workers regardless of increase in population. Regardless of increase in population. So that's the theory of Marx. Now we have to go for the evaluation of the theory. എന്തായിരിക്കും തിയറിയുടെ ഇവാലുവേഷൻ? തിയറിയുടെ ക്രിറ്റിസിസം എന്തൊക്കെയായിരിക്കും? നമുക്ക് ജസ്റ്റ് അണ്ടർസ്റ്റാൻഡ് ചെയ്യാന്നുള്ളൂ. Significance is basically the idea of affluence and the disparity existing between the rich and the poor class and the exploitation therein and the maladministration of or maldistribution of resources. That's the significance. He was able to highlight that thing. Okay, that's fine. So we have to just analyze what are the dissimilar or other the issues, the criticisms of the Marxian theories too. Okay, so we'll write critical evaluation. So first thing, at all, like economic development and economic factors are one factor that influence fertility, but there are other factors that influence growth rate or population growth. So basically, you can say population growth is a function of fertility rate and death rate. Basically, it's a balance between the death rate and what the fertility rate. എത്ര പിള്ളേർ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നു, അതുപോലെ എത്ര ആൾക്കാർ മരണപ്പെട്ടു പോകും, ഇത് തമ്മിലുള്ള ബാലൻസ് ആണ്. അപ്പൊ അതിനകത്ത് economic factors are one factor that contributes to both fertility and death rate. But these are not like direct relationship. Economic factors, economic development ഉണ്ടായി കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ നമുക്ക് തീർച്ചയായും ഡെത്ത് റേറ്റ് കുറയുമെന്ന് പറയാൻ പറ്റണമെന്നില്ല. അതുപോലെ എന്താ പറയുക, എക്കണോമിക് ഡെവലപ്മെന്റ് ഉണ്ടായെന്ന് വെച്ചിട്ട് ഫെർട്ടിലിറ്റി റേറ്റ് കുറയണമെന്ന് നിർബന്ധം പിടിക്കാൻ പറ്റത്തില്ല, അല്ലെ? ഇപ്പൊ പല എന്താണ് ആഫ്രിക്കൻ രാജ്യങ്ങളിലൊക്കെ ആണെങ്കിലും എക്കണോമിക് ഡെവലപ്മെന്റ് ഉള്ളിടത്തും ഹൈ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ ഗ്രോത്ത് ഉണ്ട്. പിന്നെ ഇന്ത്യയിലെ ഇപ്പൊ നോക്കുവാണെങ്കിലും ഇന്ത്യയിൽ ഇത്രയും ഒരു എക്കണോമിക് ഗ്രോത്ത് വന്നെങ്കിലും പലയിടത്തും ഹൈ ഗ്രോത്ത് റേറ്റ് തന്നെയാണ് ഉള്ളത്, അല്ലെ? സോ വിൽ റൈറ്റ് unprecedented growth of population. The unprecedented growth of population globally is not governed by the growth of population globally is not governed by wage levels and unemployment, wage levels or the employment status. Okay, it is primarily due to the rapid expansion in medical and healthcare services. Rapid expansion in medical and healthcare services that has substantially curtailed mortality rate. That has substantially curtailed mortality rates without simultaneously lowering the fertility rate. So you can take the example of Africa. A lot of aids are given, vaccines, UN doctor, health missions, etc. are carried out in this part of the world. So that will bring in what vaccine ഒക്കെ better ആയിട്ട് യൂസ് ചെയ്താൽ കൂടുതൽ health facilities കിട്ടിയാൽ there would be a decline in diseases. But at the same time, the economic and social conditions എന്തായിരിക്കും അവസ്ഥ? Still remains traditional and underdeveloped. So here the mortality rate is addressed because you don't need to have much of a social change for that. If you give medicines to a sick person, he will take it. But here the fertility rate and the decline of it is not that simple because there will be values attached to it. Having more and more children would be a social value, would be a moral value perhaps. So it will not be now when you are saying like now your children are not dying in their young ages, so you should be having less number of children. People will not understand that. So what? Despite having good health facility, you cannot basically change the attitude of people in a day. Health facilities can be improved in maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years, maybe in a decade. But to change people's attitude towards children, the number of children, population, etc., you will need a lot of time. But what happens is that in countries like Africa, although aid is being received from people like the Gavi Initiative, USA, UN, Gates Foundation, aids are received, food packets are received, but socio-economic development is not there. Economic development is not there, and that is not then lack of economic development is what is curtailing the social development. So social development illade fertility decline നടക്കത്തില്ല. Okay, so that's an exception. Like that's diverging from the Marxian rule. Marxian rule എന്താണ്? Economic development കുറവാണെങ്കിൽ economic development has what correlation with population. പക്ഷെ ഇവിടെ അങ്ങനെയല്ല സംഭവിക്കുന്നത്. It's a different phenomena. So that's what we have written. Expansion medical and healthcare services has substantially curtailed mortality rates without simultaneously lowering the fertility rate. അതിപ്പോ നമുക്ക് ഇന്ത്യയുടെ കാര്യം എടുക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ നോക്കാം. ഇന്ത്യയുടെ population growth rate ഇപ്പോൾ കുറഞ്ഞു വരുന്നുണ്ട്, but that was in an extended period. About 1961 തൊട്ട് population explosion India തുടങ്ങി. Huge rate of population growth rate, and that lasted for till about to at least about 2001. So it was like 40 years period, 40 to 50 years. Usually in Europe, other 20 years, 30 years, population and an explosion തീർന്നു വേറെ population growth കുറഞ്ഞ ഫേസിലേക്ക് പോയി. പക്ഷെ India took like about 50 years and plus running to bring that decline in population growth rate. Right. So that was again I'm saying because of that the government has been able to successfully provide medical facilities to an extent. ഇപ്പോൾ നമ്മുടെ കേരളത്തിലൊക്കെ ആണെങ്കിൽ എല്ലാവർക്കും പോളിയോ വാക്സിനേഷൻ കിട്ടുന്നു, അങ്ങനെയുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെ കിട്ടുന്നു. But on the same level, socio-economic development has happened, or there was a delay in the socio-economic development. For example, ഇപ്പോഴാണെങ്കിൽ നമ്മൾ മിഷൻ പരിവാർ വികാസ് യോജനയൊക്കെ ലിമിറ്റഡ് applicability ആണ് ചില സ്റ്റേറ്റ്സിൽ നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ സാധിക്കുക. So there's a gap between, and population growth rate is function of that difference between birth rate and death rate. അതിന് പല ഫാക്ടേഴ്സ് ഉണ്ടായിരിക്കാം, അങ്ങനത്തെ ഒരു ഫാക്ടർ മാത്രമാണ് എക്കണോമിക് കണ്ടീഷൻസ്. Another criticism is that second one, the rise in population does not directly determine wage levels as assumed by Marx. Wage levels are governed by complex socio-economic, political, technological factors, etc. So the increase in population, Marx's premise is basically that increase in population would lead to surplus workforce. Surplus workforce would lead to decline in wage rates, but that's not the case always. Maybe increase in population would lead to better growth. Better technology, new technology comes in, you will need new, you will create new employment opportunities, and then you would require more people to work there. But China is the best example. China took advantage of its what its low population, it's a high population. So, but you never saw like wage rates declining in China. Okay, so it had a huge population, but it was able to utilize that population, or rather, it was not letting that population to be a surplus one. It was providing enough jobs. Standard of living was constantly being raised through a capitalistic mode of production, which was seen in China, state-controlled capitalism, right? So in that way, China was able to what uh, the Chinese experience tells us that the notion of rising population leading to wage level decrease is actually very deterministic one, because with respect to government policies, with respect to new technologies, with respect to increased consumption of goods and services, there would be more and more demand for labor forces, and then this population will not become a surplus one, or there will not be a scarcity of employment opportunities. So you will see your income increasing, your standard of living increasing, and finally population decreasing. Getting me? എഴുതില്ലേ? So it's necessary that you cite some of the examples that I said. ഞാൻ ചൈനയുടെ എക്സാമ്പിൾ പറഞ്ഞു, അതിന് മുമ്പ് വേറെ എക്സാമ്പിളുകൾ പറഞ്ഞു. സോ അത് എഴുതി വെക്കുക. Marx, a third one, Marx overemphasized. Marx overemphasized the evils of capitalism. Although his theory may be somewhat relevant, to capitalist society, it could not account for other type of societies, including communist type of societies. It was during the mixed economic phase that our growth rate was really high. After the economic reforms, we generally see the population growth rate decreasing. African countries, you can say in a way communist countries, it's not communism as such, but these are societies based on communes, social groups, tribal groups, tribal classes, etc. അങ്ങനെയുള്ള community centered ആയിട്ടുള്ള groups ആണ് പലപ്പോഴും ആഫ്രിക്കയിലൊക്കെ രാജ്യങ്ങൾ നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്. But we still see there is high growth rate in Africa. But whereas in the capitalistic world, you can broadly see there's a general decline in population growth rate because of the increased standard of living of even the working class. The working class is getting affluence there. Okay. Another criticism is that Marx overemphasized economic variables. Marx overemphasized economic variables such as modes of production in his theory. And overemphasized on modes of production and rendered other and in that process rendered other variables like educational levels, technological advancements to the background. അപ്പോൾ എന്താണ് പലപ്പോഴും പോപ്പുലേഷൻ ഗ്രോത്ത് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു സോഷ്യൽ കണ്ടീഷന്റെ, സോഷ്യോ എക്കണോമിക് കണ്ടീഷന്റെ, എക്കണോമിക് മാത്രമല്ല സോഷ്യൽ കണ്ടീഷന്റെ, സോഷ്യൽ ദി ഹ്യൂമൻ ഡെവലപ്മെന്റിന്റെ, എഡ്യൂക്കേഷന്റെ, അതുപോലെ അവൈലബിലിറ്റി ഓഫ് കോൺട്രസെപ്റ്റീവ്സ്, ഇങ്ങനെ പല കാര്യങ്ങളുടെ ഒരു ഫംഗ്ഷൻ ആണ്, നോട്ട് ജസ്റ്റ് ഡയറക്ട്ലി ഫ്രം economic dimension. So he was not focusing much on do these things like education level, technological advancements in this case. So these were the factors which led to, in fact, what decline in population in the developed countries, and at the same time did not lead to what decline of population growth in developing countries like India, or rather earlier in India. So അത്രയാണ് ഒരു 4 criticisms നമ്മൾ എഴുതി. He was mostly limited by capitalistic, anti-capitalist perspective. So he basically applied to that kind of system. Just to do ഒരു analysis കൂടെ എഴുതാം. Significance അല്ലെങ്കിൽ what relevance of Marx. Despite these shortcomings, Marx must be credited for. Despite these shortcomings, Marx must be credited for putting forward the idea about or highlighting the idea of, sorry, highlighting the idea must be credited for highlighting the issue of affluence and rampant inequality. Affluence and inequality. The issue of affluence and inequality in the contemporary industrial world. The contemporary industrial world. His idea of state intervention. His idea of state intervention in emancipation of poor has great relevance in the present world. This idea of state intervention in emancipation of poor has great relevance in present world. So we can talk about the Marxian ideas, the idea of welfare economics, what the idea of reducing inequality, the Keynesian principles, etc., or the redistribution of income. അങ്ങനത്തെ കാര്യങ്ങൾ എഴുതാം. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ you can also talk about the high inequalities and that leading to unsustainable models of with respect to population and with respect to both other aspects also. അപ്പോൾ ഇത്രയും കാര്യങ്ങൾ എഴുതാം. So that's what we have seen about the affluence part. Maybe we have to look at between the comparison between Malthus and Marx in a slight way. And after that, we will look into another theory that is known by the name demographic transition theory, which was one of the most comprehensive theory of population growth, or which was able to capture the mechanisms of population growth. അപ്പോൾ അത്രയും 3 theories ആണ് നമുക്ക് എന്താ പറയുക population theories പഠിക്കാനുള്ളത്. So we have studied Marx. Now, whenever you are faced with a question with respect to population and other factors, you have to consider all these 3 elements: population and resources, population and affluence, population and technology. So technology provides, even when affluence is increasing and issues are there, technology can be a solution for this high affluence and problems arising thus far. Resource shortage, obviously technology can be a solution. That is known as a cornucopian perspective. Technology oriented approach is known also as the cornucopian. Just on the word cornucopian. Okay. Break it along, and after that we'll conclude. Continue. Cornucopian. C-O-R-N-U-C-O-P-I-A-N. I think so. C-O-R-N-U-C-O-P-I-A-N. അപ്പോൾ നേരത്തെ ഒരു ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, എന്താണ് ഓവർ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ ഇന്ത്യയുടെ ഡെവലപ്പിംഗ് വേൾഡിന് ഒരു വലിയ ഇഷ്യൂ ആണെന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ. സോ ബേസിക്കലി ഇൻ ദോസ് കൈൻഡ് ഓഫ് പെർസ്പെക്റ്റീവ് ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് യു ഹാവ് ടു ബ്രിങ് ഇൻ ഓൾ ദീസ് തരം. ഓവർ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ എന്ന് മാത്രമല്ല, അതിൻ്റെ റിസോഴ്സ് മാത്രം. ഓവർ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ It is with respect to resource, affluence, and technology. ഈ മൂന്ന് കാര്യങ്ങളെ കമ്പൈൻ ചെയ്ത് വേണം പോപ്പുലേഷൻ റിലേറ്റഡ് കാര്യങ്ങൾ എഴുതാൻ. അത് രണ്ട് തിയറീസ് നമ്മൾ പഠിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞു. കോപ്പിനായിട്ട് തിയറി ആയിട്ട് നമ്മൾ പഠിക്കുന്നില്ല. പക്ഷേ ടെക്നോളജി ഈസ് ഓൾസോ എ ഹ്യൂജ് എലമെന്റ് വിച്ച് ചേഞ്ചസ് resources, which create resources, which provides new utility to traditionally used resources. So our കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഓർത്ത് വെക്കുക. Okay, we'll take a break. And it's 11 o'clock. Yeah. Okay,
Sir,
sorry.
human
Yeah,
geography, population and settlement geography എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ പോർഷൻ അല്ലേ?
yeah.
ഈ theories ഒക്കെ അത് ബിനു മാമും ഇതൊക്കെ എടുത്തായിരുന്നു ആക്ച്വലി. മാമും ഇതൊക്കെ എടുക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ആ റൂറൽ സെറ്റിൽമെന്റ് സെറ്റിൽമെന്റ്സ് ഒക്കെ
തിയറീസ് എടുത്തോ? ഏത് തിയറീസ് എടുത്തു?
ഈ പറഞ്ഞ രണ്ട് തിയറീസും ഡെമോഗ്രാഫിക് ട്രാൻസിഷനും എടുത്തായിരുന്നു ലാസ്റ്റ് ക്ലാസ്. പിന്നെ സെറ്റിൽമെന്റ്സും എടുത്തായിരുന്നു, urban റൂറൽ സെറ്റിൽമെന്റ്സ് ഒക്കെ.
സെറ്റിൽമെന്റ്സ് എന്തായാലും ക്രിസ്റ്റാലോ ഒക്കെ എടുത്തോ? സിപിടി ഒക്കെ എടുത്തോ? സെൻട്രൽ തിയറി ഒക്കെ എടുത്തോ?
ഇല്ല സർ, ആ തിയറി എടുത്തിട്ടില്ല. മാത്യൂസ് എടുത്തു, ഡെമോഗ്രാഫിക് ട്രാൻസിഷൻ എടുത്തു, പിന്നെ ഈ
മാൽത്തസ് ഓൾറെഡി എടുത്തെന്ന് പുള്ളിക്കാരോട് പറഞ്ഞില്ലേ അന്നേരം?
അത് അന്ന് ജസ്റ്റ് ഒരു ഇൻട്രൊഡക്ഷൻ പോലെ അല്ലേ, ജസ്റ്റ് നോട്ട്സ് ചെയ്തില്ലായിരുന്നല്ലോ സർ. പിന്നെ മാം അത് എടുത്തു.
ഓക്കെ, പുള്ളിക്കാരോട് ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞത് മോഡൽ, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ പുള്ളിക്കാരി എന്നോട് പറഞ്ഞത് മോഡൽസ് ആൻഡ് തിയറീസ് മൈ പാർട്ട് ആൻഡ് ഐ ഡോണ്ട് നോ വാട്ട് ഷീ ഈസ് ഡൂയിങ്. അപ്പൊ ഞാനിന്ന് ഡെമോഗ്രാഫിക് ട്രാൻസിഷൻ തിയറി കൂടെ എടുക്കാന്നുള്ള ഐഡിയയിലാണ് വന്നത്.
സർ, ഈ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ ആൻഡ് സെറ്റിൽമെന്റ് ജോഗ്രഫിയിലെ മിക്ക പോർഷൻസും കംപ്ലീറ്റ് ആയിരുന്നു. മൈഗ്രേഷനും ഇതൊക്കെ. സെൻട്രൽ പ്ലേസ് തിയറി എടുത്തില്ല.
ഇതിനകത്ത് മോഡൽസ് ആൻഡ് തിയറീസ് വരുന്ന പോർഷൻസ് ആണ് ഈ 2-3 തിയറീസ്. ബാക്കി തിയറീസ് ഉണ്ട്, മൈഗ്രേഷൻ തിയറീസ് ഒന്നും നമ്മൾ മോഡൽസ് ആൻഡ് തിയറീസ് നോക്കാറില്ല. പുള്ളിക്കാർക്ക് ഒരു ഐഡിയ ഇല്ല, പുള്ളിക്കാരുടെ പറഞ്ഞു തരും. ഓക്കെ, ദാറ്റ്സ് ഓക്കെ, ഐ വിൽ ഡീൽ വിത്ത് ഇറ്റ്. ഞാൻ ചോദിക്കാം.
ഓക്കെ സർ.
Yeah, all right, we'll take a break, we'll come back after. Okay. Okay, hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, about that thing. അപ്പോ പുള്ളിക്കാരി എന്തേരം കാര്യങ്ങൾ എടുത്തു ബിനിമ?
മാൽത്തൂസിയനും മാർക്സിയനും ഡെമോഗ്രഫിക് ട്രാൻസിഷൻ തിയറീസും എടുത്തായിരുന്നു.
ഓക്കെ, ഞാൻ ബേസിക്കലി ഇന്ന് അതെടുക്കാനുള്ള പ്ലാനിലാണ് വന്നത്. ബിക്കോസ് അവർ ഡിവിഷൻ വാസ് ദാറ്റ് ഐ ജസ്റ്റ് കൺഫേം വാട്ട് വി ഡു ഇസ് ലൈക്ക് മാർക്സിനും മാൽത്തൂസിനും കമ്പയർ ചെയ്തായിരുന്നു. Marxian theory vs Malthusian theory, similarly demographic theory vs അങ്ങനത്തെ കമ്പാരിസൺ ഒക്കെ ചെയ്തു. എത്രത്തോളം ഡീറ്റെയിൽ ആയിട്ട് പഠിപ്പിച്ചു എന്നാണ് ഞാൻ ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. ജസ്റ്റ് പാസ് ചെയ്ത് പോയിട്ടുള്ളൂ.
ആ തിയറി പിന്നെ ഡെമോഗ്രഫിക് ട്രാൻസിഷൻ ആണെങ്കിൽ തിയറി, ആ കർവ്, പിന്നെ അതിന്റെ ക്രിറ്റിസിസം അതൊക്കെ എഴുതിയായിരുന്നു.
ആണല്ലേ, അപ്പൊ കവർ ചെയ്തു അല്ലേ? ഓക്കെ. So I think we'll write just the നമ്മൾ ഇത്ര നേരം വലിയ കമ്പാരിസൺ ബിറ്റ്വീൻ മാർക്സിൻ ആൻഡ് മാൽത്തൂസിയൻ തിയറി നമ്മളൊന്ന് കാണാം. അതിനുശേഷം ഐ തിങ്ക് ഐ വിൽ ഹാവ് വേറൊരു തിയറി ഞാൻ എടുക്കാം. എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഞാൻ ഹാർട്ട് ലാൻഡ് തിയറി വല്ല എടുക്കാന്ന് നോക്കുന്നു. ആൻഡ് ദെൻ ഇറ്റ് സി ലൈക്ക് ഞാൻ ബാക്കി അത്രയും ഞാൻ പ്രിപ്പയർ ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ള എന്നതിന് വേണ്ടി നോട്ട്സ് ഒക്കെ ആയിട്ട്. ഐ തിങ്ക് ഐ വിൽ ടേക്ക് ദാറ്റ് ഹാർട്ട് ലാൻഡ് തിയറി. നമുക്ക് നോക്കാം. ഓക്കെ, ഫോർ നൗ വി വിൽ റൈറ്റ് ദ ബുക്ക്, ഗോ ഫോർ ദ കമ്പാരിസൺ ബിറ്റ്വീൻ മാർക്സിൻ ആൻഡ് മാൽത്തൂസിയൻ തിയറി. ഓക്കെ, അത് പുള്ളിക്കാരി എടുത്തിട്ടുള്ളൂ.
ഇല്ല സാർ, അങ്ങനെ കമ്പാരിസൺ ആയിട്ട് എഴുതിയിട്ടില്ല.
Okay. Yeah. So this models and theories is kind of thought. Basically, models എടുക്കുന്നത് population ആ ഒരു relevant ആയിട്ടുള്ള topic എന്നാണ്. But UPC is dealing with it in a more detailed manner. So that's what we had initially thought of, like taking models separately. All right, let's see. Okay, so we'll first compare the Marxian theory with Malthusian theory. So അങ്ങനത്തെ ചോദ്യങ്ങൾ UPC ചോദിക്കാറുണ്ട്. What's the difference? What are the similarities and dissimilarities between the perspectives of Marx and Malthusian? We'll just write it. Write in order and explain to you. Okay. Okay. First, we'll start with similarities between Malthus and Malthusian theories. Okay, similarities first. So both Malthus and Marx and Malthus recognize the, both of them recognize the negative correlation between, or inverse correlation between wage rates and wage levels and birth and death rates. So both recognize the inverse correlation between wage and birth rates. However, this work is more explicit in the works of Marx. This idea is more explicit in the works of Marx. So even Malthus has identified the working class population as the hotbeds of population explosion. So he had also talked about that, where the miseries and everything is more in the working class population, and similarly the overpopulation and population explosion is happening in working class population. Working class population explosion വരുന്നു. അതുപോലെ പ്രിവെന്റീവ് ചെക്സും ഒക്കെ വരുമ്പോഴും ഏറ്റവും കൂടുതൽ സഫർ ചെയ്യുന്നത് വർക്കിംഗ് ക്ലാസ് ആയിരിക്കുന്ന ഒരു ഐഡിയ മാൽത്തസും പറയുന്നുണ്ട്. ബട്ട് ദെൻ മാൽത്തസ് ഡസ് നോട്ട് ടേക്ക് ദാറ്റ് ഇൻടു എ ക്രിറ്റിസിസം ഓഫ് ക്യാപിറ്റലിസം ഓർ ഇനീക്വാലിറ്റി, മാൽ ഡിസ്ട്രിബ്യൂഷൻ, അതിലേക്കൊന്നും മാൽത്തസ് പോകുന്നില്ല. മാൽത്തസ് ജസ്റ്റ് ഐഡന്റിഫൈസ് ദാറ്റ് working class is a segment that is associated with population explosion, right? So however, this notion is more explicit in the works of Karl Marx. Next one, both can be recognized as an economic theory of population. both Malthus and Marx as recognized can be recognized as an economic theory of population, as they stresses on stressed on the economic variables like resources and resources and modes of production respectively. So Malthus has talked about resources and its finite nature, whereas Marx was looking at the mode of production. Both are economic theories in that perspective. Another similarity is that both of them have underemphasized the role of technological development. Both of them underemphasize the role of technology. And in fact, both of them have failed to conceive the possibility. Both of them has failed to conceive the possibility that population can grow and living standards can improve hand in hand over a long period of time. Both can improve. The population can grow, whereas standard of living can also improve hand in hand over a long period of time. So basically, the premise of Malthus was that population increases, resource shortage will be there, standard of living will decrease. Marxian idea was that industrial reserve army would be there, wage levels will fall down, more population would be there, and thus people will be having less and less resources to deal with, or rather wage to live with. So their standard of living would decline. But the reality has been totally different from that. And that's also been a criticism of both Marx and Malthus. Malthusന്റെ കാര്യത്തിൽ നമ്മൾ പറയുന്നു റിസോഴ്സ് ഗ്യാപ്പ്, പോപ്പുലേഷൻ റിസോഴ്സ് ഗ്യാപ്പ് നമ്മൾ പറഞ്ഞ കാര്യം അത്രത്തോളം എന്താണ് വന്നില്ല. ഇൻഫാക്ട് വി ആർ ഏബിൾ ടു ഫിക്സ് ദാറ്റ് ഗ്യാപ്പ്. So similarly, in case of Marx also, we can identify that although population has grown, standard of living has not necessarily came down. Standard of living has improved across the world. India നോക്കുവാണെങ്കിലും Africa നോക്കുവാണെങ്കിലും inequality is increasing, but standard of living per se has improved for even for the poor people. There has been differences in the way standard of living has increased for the rich class and the poor people. So we'll cite the examples of this Oxfam report. 56% of the income is earned by 1% of the 10% of the society, wealth by 70%. All those things are there where you can cite inequality, but you cannot negate the fact that the standard of living of even the poor people has increased. So poverty has gone down, hunger has gone down, more access to technological aspects, more access to TV, electronic goods, etc. All these things are increased. Standard of living has increased, education level has increased. So that has been a tool which was not predicted so by Malthus and Marx. They wanted, or they perceived to be when population grows, the misery will increase. But in fact, the systems that were there, maybe the capitalistic system and the other thing were predominantly the capitalistic system were able to provide for that's been a criticism, and that has also been a similarity between both these Malthus and Marx. Okay. Now, more importantly, we have to look at, and we can also say that both of them were in a way deterministic. Marx were more, Robert Malthus കുറേയും കൂടെ deterministic ആയിരുന്നു. Marx അത്രയും deterministic അല്ല, because Marx identified that it is human built ആയിട്ടുള്ള എന്താണ് ചില സോഷ്യൽ സ്ട്രക്ചേഴ്സ് ആണ് ഇഷ്യൂ ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്നത് എന്നുള്ള പെർസ്പെക്റ്റീവ് ആണ്. ബട്ട് ഈവൻ വിത്തിൻ ദാറ്റ് ജനറലി നമുക്ക് രണ്ടുപേരെയും ഡിറ്റർമിനിസ്റ്റിക് ആയിട്ട് കാണാൻ പറ്റും. മാർക്സ് വാസ് ലൈക്ക് സ്ട്രക്ചറൽ ഡിറ്റർമിനിസ്റ്റിക്. സ്ട്രക്ചറലിസം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആ സ്ട്രക്ചറിന് ഭയങ്കര സിഗ്നിഫിക്കൻസ് കൊടുത്തിട്ട് ഹ്യൂമന്റെ റോൾ കുറച്ചാണ് മാർക്സ് കണ്ടിരുന്നത്. സോ വി ക്യാൻ ജസ്റ്റ് റൈറ്റ് സിമിലാരിറ്റി ആയിട്ടും ഡിസിമിലാരിറ്റി ആയിട്ടും എഴുതാം. സിമിലാരിറ്റി നമുക്ക് എഴുതാം ബോത്ത് ഓഫ് ദം വേർ ഡിറ്റർമിനിസ്റ്റിക് ഇൻ നേച്ചർ, where both of them were deterministic in nature. Malthus had a static view of resources, and its finite nature. Static view of resources and its finite nature. Whereas Marx perceived the economic structure to be of paramount importance. പക്ഷെ മാൽത്തസിന്റെ പെർസ്പെക്റ്റീവ് നമുക്ക് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മാർക്സിന്റെ പെർസ്പെക്റ്റീവ് നമുക്ക് നോക്കുവാണെങ്കിൽ അറിയാം മാർക്സ് ഈസ് അഡ്വക്കേറ്റിംഗ് ഫോർ സോഷ്യൽ റിഫോം അല്ലെങ്കിൽ സ്ട്രക്ചറൽ റിഫോംസ് ആണ് മാർക്സ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. സോ വി കനോട്ട് കംപ്ലീറ്റ്ലി സേ മാർക്സ് ഈസ് സ്ട്രക്ചറൽ, ഇറ്റ്സ് ഡിറ്റർമിനിസ്റ്റിക്. സോ വി can also write that. So although Marx also puts a lot of importance on the structural aspect, Marx believes in human capacity as reflected in his writings on Marx believes in human capacity and or possibilistic output as reflected in his writings on structural reforms and communist ideas or ideas of communes. Robert Malthus അങ്ങനെയല്ലായിരുന്നു. Malthus was like giving preventive checks to ആയിगी എന്നുള്ള ഐഡിയ ആയിരുന്നു അല്ലെ. preventive checks അല്ല, positive checks will be there anyhow, whatever people do, and there will be positive checks. So whereas Malthus was supremely deterministic, whereas Malthus was more deterministic as reflected in his belief in supremacy of positive checks. Next one, dissimilarities. We have to see certain dissimilarities between the Malthusian approach and the Marxian approach. So this is again the analytical part of our understanding. When we say we have to analytically understand these areas, we have to see how these people are differing, first of all we'll see what are their relevance, what are their criticism, what are the advantages of this theory, and also we have to compare between them, like how they are understanding the subjective reality that is there, how they are differingly understanding it. Okay, dissimilarities. Malthus tried to provide a natural law on population and demographic process. While the theory of Marx, so Malthus tried to provide a natural law in the sense that that is applicable across different settings. Wherever you go, we have a natural law, underlying law, that is resources are finite, and population can grow beyond that, and that will be a gap between the positive checks. That's what natural law. So that's applicable across societies in Malthus view. Malthus conceived that theory to be in that perspective. While theory of Marx is related with a particular socio-economic structure. While theory of Marx is related with a particular theory of Marx is related with a particular socio-economic structure. You know that capitalistic system. And would in all probabilities and will not would in all probabilities will not apply, and in all probabilities will not apply to other socio-economic structures. So Marxian theory, capitalist system applicability if you are going beyond the capitalist system, looking into maybe a feudal nature, feudal ആയിട്ടുള്ള society like a tribal ആയിട്ടുള്ള society if you look at some other like a communist society, we will not be able to see such kind of a correlation. But so that's a limitation. Malthus's theory നമുക്ക് ഏത് setting വേണമെങ്കിലും apply ചെയ്യാം. But even the another criticistic കണ്ടായിരുന്നു, Marx is not able to look into other kind of societies which is non-capitalistic in nature, but which faces the similar problems of overpopulation and population management. അതിലേക്ക് മാർക്സ് നോക്കുന്നില്ല. So Marx is just focused on the capitalistic structure. So in fact, the reason is that the Marxian theory per se is not a demographic theory. That's a more of a critic on capitalism. നമ്മൾ കണ്ടായിരുന്നു socialist criticism on capitalism. അതിന്റെ അകത്ത് ഒരു undertone മാത്രമാണ് what this the demographic theory. Okay, so adoru difference aanu, whereas okay, that can also be written. Malthus was specifically looking into the Malthusian population theory, focused on understanding the man-environment relationship from a resource perspective. That's the specialized. It was one of the first specialized approach on population. Whereas the demographic demographic analysis, forms only a part of the Marxian work, Marxist philosophy, which was primarily a critique on capitalism or capitalist structure. Just primarily a critique of capitalist structure. All right. So another difference is ideological perspectives of Marx and Malthus are antipodal in nature. Ideological perspectives of both Malthus and Marx was antipodal in nature. Malthusian theory is capitalistic in its nature. Malthusian theory is capitalistic in its basic nature. Capitalistic in its ideology, where he regards where Malthus regards self-interest among couples to be a guiding factor in manufacturing, marriage, family, etc. So this idea of liberalism, individualism, all these are related with capitalistic systems, whereas the communist and commune social theories are mostly society oriented. Uh, that is not individualistic theories. So when you say like when you give this individualistic ideologies, liberalism, all these are considered to be part of the capitalistic ideas as they evolved in Europe. So individualism and capitalism both goes hand in hand. So and also Malthus was never raising any criticism against about the capitalist structure that was there, despite he identified the fact that poverty and population issues can be attributed uh, to the working class segment, right? So he was also not speaking much about that. While Marx had a while Marx had a while Marx had a communist ideology. So one is basically individualism, the individualism based, and the other one is more community based. നമ്മൾ കമ്മ്യൂണിസം എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ പൊതുവെ ഇവിടുത്തെ ഒരു നമ്മുടെ ഒരു കേരള സിറ്റുവേഷനിൽ ഒരു ഐഡിയ ആണ് ഉദ്ദേശിക്കുന്നത്. കമ്മ്യൂണിസം ഹാസ് ഇറ്റ്സ് ഓൺ ഐഡിയ ദാറ്റ് ഇറ്റ്സ് എ മോർ ഓഫ് എ ജസ്റ്റ് ലൈക്ക് റിലീജിയൻ, ഇറ്റ്സ് ഓൾസോ എ വെരി മച്ച് സൊസൈറ്റി ഓറിയന്റഡ്, കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റി ഓറിയന്റഡ് അപ്രോച്ച്. ഇൻഡിവിജ്വലിസം അല്ല, whereby the community is dominating, not the individual. In capitalism, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ the more traditional Western totally individual is important, but in communist views like for റഷ്യയിലൊക്കെ നോക്കുമ്പോഴാണെങ്കിലും you are not looking at individual freedom, but social stability or some social goals that need to be achieved. ആ രീതിയിലാണ് കമ്മ്യൂണിസം വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. പക്ഷേ ക്യാപിറ്റലിസ്റ്റിനകത്ത് കൂടുതലും ഇൻഡിവിജ്വൽ ആസ്പിറേഷൻസിനാണ്. whatever an aspiration of an individual, unless it is not breaking law, he or she can pursue it എന്നുള്ളതാണ് capitalist idea, which the direct opposite is what the communist idea is like. Okay, so while Marx had a communist ideology and saw ownership of private property as the root cause of ownership of private property as the root cause of all evils, confronting the society. So very different perspective on both of them. Another difference is that according to Malthusian theory, the problem of population and inequality are space dependent, space of different regions and the population and resource condition existing in those regions. So it's a space dependent theory, the Malthusian one, while the Marxian theory is based upon historical materialism, and visualizes the problem to be a historical materialism and visualizes the problem to be of time dependent one, to be a time dependent. So it's a function of time, like the more the capitalist system is working in a particular society, the more unequal it becomes, and the more the misery is increasing for the working class, and thus population would be growing there. That's an idea. പക്ഷെ മാൽത്തസിന്റെ കാര്യത്തിലാണെങ്കിലോ ടൈം അല്ല, ഓരോ സെറ്റിംഗ് ഉണ്ട്, ഓരോ സ്പേസ് സെറ്റിംഗ്സ് ഉണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഓരോ സൊസൈറ്റിയിലും അവിടുത്തെ റിസോഴ്സസും പീപ്പിളും തമ്മിലുള്ള മിസ്മാച്ച്. സോ അത് ഡിഫേഴ്സ് ഫ്രോം വൺ സ്പേസ് ടു ദി അതർ. പക്ഷെ മാർക്സ് ഫോക്കസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് പല കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റീസ് അങ്ങനെയുള്ളതിനേക്കാൾ ഉപരി ഒരു സൊസൈറ്റിയിൽ എന്താണ് ക്യാപിറ്റലിസ്റ്റിക് സിസ്റ്റം എത്ര നാളായിട്ട് ഓപ്പറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നു, അതിന്റെ ഭാഗമായിട്ട് എത്രത്തോളം വാട്ട് ദേ കോൾ ആസ് ഇവിൽസ് ആർ ദേർ എന്നുള്ള ഒരു ഐഡിയ ആണ് രണ്ടുപേരും നോക്കുന്നത്. സോ നമ്മൾ നേരത്തെ ഡിറ്റർമിനിസ്റ്റിന്റെ ഒരു എലമെന്റ് എഴുതിയെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് അതിന്റെ ഓപ്പോസിറ്റ് കാര്യം കൂടി ഒന്ന് എഴുതാം. Malthusian theory is more deterministic. Okay, first we'll start with although both have deterministic approach, although both Marx and Marx has deterministic approach, Malthusian theory is more deterministic. Malthusian theory is more deterministic, while Marxian theory has more possibilistic orientation. While Marxian theory has more possibilistic orientation. So we can write the aspect of Malthus believed that the only solution to population problems was with preventive positive checks. So Malthus believes in the primacy of positive checks, while Marx pleads for radical dismantling of capitalistic structure. So in a way that when you say that you can dismantle the capitalist structure, Marx is saying that human capacity can make difference. So on the one hand, on the capitalist system identify he is deterministic in perspective, but he is able to give solutions. That is or he has what a vision where human agency can make change. So അതുകൊണ്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ പറയുക, ഓരോ രണ്ടുപേർക്കും ഡിറ്റർമിനിസ്റ്റിക് പെർസ്പെക്റ്റീവ് ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ മാർക്സിനെ നമുക്ക് ജസ്റ്റ് ഒരു ഡിറ്റർമിനിസ്റ്റിക് എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലോട്ട് എന്താ പറയുക ബ്രാൻഡ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റില്ല. മാർക്സ് ആസ് ബോത്ത് ഡിറ്റർമിനിസ്റ്റിക് ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു എഴുത്തുണ്ട്, അതുപോലെ തന്നെ ഒരു പോസിബിലിറ്റി അണ്ടർടോൺസ് ക്യാൻ ഓൾസോ ബി സീൻ ഇൻ ദ മാൽത്തൂസിയൻ വർക്ക്സ്. ഓക്കെ, അത്രയാണ് നമുക്ക് മാർക്സിയൻ ആൻഡ് മാൽത്തൂസിയൻ തിയറിയെ കുറിച്ച് കമ്പയർ ചെയ്ത് സംസാരിക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നത്. മാൽത്തൂസിയൻ തിയറി, ഐ തിങ്ക് മാൽത്തൂസിയൻ തിയറി ഈസ് മോർ ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ് ഇൻ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ സ്റ്റഡീസ്. ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ വൈസ് ആണെങ്കിലും കൂടുതൽ മാൽത്തൂസിയൻ തിയറി എന്നാണ് ചോദ്യങ്ങൾ നമുക്ക് വന്നിട്ടുള്ളത്. ഓക്കെ, സോ യു ഗൈസ് ആർ സെയിങ് ലൈക്ക് ഡെമോഗ്രാഫിക് ട്രാൻസിഷൻ പഠിപ്പിച്ചാണ് അല്ലെ? ഇന്ത്യൻ ഡെമോഗ്രാഫിക് ട്രാൻസിഷൻ കൂടെ എടുത്തായിരുന്നല്ലോ അല്ലെ? ആൻഡ് I think age structure would have been covered in that part. Different stages would have been covered. Stage 4, what the low stability stage would have been covered. On stage 4, 5, what you call as the stage, the new stage 5 in a idea on the whereby population is declining in some of the developed countries. I think that's okay to
സർ ഈ ഗ്രാഫ് വരച്ചു, ഈ ഡിഫറെന്റ് സ്റ്റേജസ് എന്താണ് അതിന്റെ ആ ഫീച്ചേഴ്സ് ഒക്കെ പറഞ്ഞു, ക്രിറ്റിസിസവും പറഞ്ഞു. പിന്നെ ഇന്ത്യൻ തേർഡ് സ്റ്റേജിലാണെന്ന് എഴുതിയിട്ടുണ്ട്.
മേ ബി അത് ഇന്ത്യൻ പോപ്പുലേഷൻ കൾച്ചറൽ സെറ്റിംഗ്സ് വരുമ്പോഴത്തേനും പഠിപ്പിക്കുമായിരിക്കും. അതായിരിക്കും ഐഡിയ. ഐ തിങ്ക് ഷീ ഈസ് ടേക്കിംഗ് ബോത്ത് ദീസ് സെഗ്മെന്റ്സ്, റൈറ്റ്? സോ ദാറ്റ് വി ഐഡിയ. സ്റ്റേജ് 5 കുറിച്ച് പറഞ്ഞായിരുന്നു.
സ്റ്റേജ് 5 ജപ്പാൻ എക്സാമ്പിൾ ആയിട്ട് ജസ്റ്റ് പറഞ്ഞായിരുന്നു, ഇങ്ങനെ സ്റ്റെബിലൈസ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്, നെഗറ്റീവ് പോപ്പുലേഷൻ വരുന്നത്. ജസ്റ്റ് അങ്ങനെ പറഞ്ഞത്, ഡീറ്റെയിൽ ആയിട്ട് എഴുതിയിട്ടൊന്നുമില്ല.
I mean, the death rate goes like on the basis of economic boom and economic cycles. Either economic boom, economic bust ഉണ്ടാകുന്നതനുസരിച്ച് the growth rate will be changing. Growth rate may fall below death rate at some point of time. That's what basically you talk about in the case of stage 5. Whereas earlier നമുക്ക് stagnant ആണ്, stage 4 വരുമ്പോഴത്തേനും population has stabilized, low stability, high stability. High stability ഏതാണ്? High stable conditions. Or high stationary stage, high stable conditions. But basically that's stage 1, whereby stage 1. Very good. Stage 1 you have birth rate and death rate both to be of very high. And അവിടെ ഏതാണ് വേരി ചെയ്യുന്നത്? സ്റ്റേജ് 1 ഡെത്ത് റേറ്റ് ആണോ ബർത്ത് റേറ്റ് ആണോ വേരി ചെയ്യുന്നത്? ഏതാണ് വേരി ചെയ്യുന്നത്?
Random fluctuating high birth and death rate at stage 1.
Stage 1 birth rate does not change much. Death rate is the one that is changing. Birth rate almost remains the same because എനിക്ക് അങ്ങനെ വലിയ മാറ്റങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടാകുന്നില്ല. Conditions are same. കാര്യമായിട്ട് കോൺട്രസെപ്ഷൻസോ അങ്ങനത്തെ കാര്യങ്ങളൊന്നുമില്ല. It's like high. Death rate is the one changes. Death rate changes with respect to when pandemic hits, famine hits. So the stage 1 you have to see it in correlation with the stages of growth by Rostow. കേട്ടിട്ടുണ്ടോ? റോസ്റ്റോസ് മോഡൽ പഠിപ്പിച്ചാണോ?
ഇല്ല സർ.
റോസ്റ്റോ പഠിപ്പിച്ചില്ല അല്ലെ? Okay, so that's an idea of stages of growth. There is primitive society to highly developed society. So stage 1 is basically when you are in a primitive society whereby you have subsistence agriculture, not much of industrialization, not much of development, nothing. You are living in a very primitive world. What you call as not much of medical facilities, not much of health and other things like economic development is very low. Where you see you have very low standard of living, and because of that factor you have high birth rate, obviously about 45% of carry growth rate area. Death rate would be also in that same order. So sometimes the death rate changes, not exactly birth rate very changes usually vararilla because countries are poor, society is really poor, backward, contraceptives on the. So there you will not face much of change, but death rate changes very much because even in the case of India, 1921 was the dividing point. 1921 in Mumbai, what you call as India was in stage 1. After that you started moving to stage 2. So stage 1 in you will be vulnerable to a lot of things. So for example, if plague is there, suppose black death in Europe, plague one, pandemic one, എന്താ സംഭവിക്കുക? ഡെത്ത് റേറ്റ് ഭയങ്കരമായിട്ട് കൂടും. പക്ഷെ ബർത്ത് റേറ്റ് സ്റ്റിൽ ദെൻ ഓൾസോ ഇറ്റ് റിമെയിൻസ് ദ സെയിം, ബട്ട് ഡെത്ത് റേറ്റ് ഭയങ്കരമായിട്ട് കൂടും. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഒരു ഫാമീൻ വന്നു. 1921 അതാണ് സംഭവിച്ചത്. ഫാമീൻ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, സ്പാനിഷ് ഫ്ലൂ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു, ഓൾ ദീസ് തിങ്സ് വർ ദേർ. സോ ബിക്കോസ് ഓഫ് ദാറ്റ് സെക്കൻഡ് വേൾഡ് വാർ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ബിക്കോസ് ഓഫ് ദാറ്റ് ഫസ്റ്റ് വേൾഡ് വാർ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. Because of that the death rate has varied, but then again the population is almost stable. So India had a negative growth rate, negative population growth rate in 1921 census. Then we know like the different factors sets in. Okay, so ആദ്യം ഏതാണ് birth rate ആണോ death rate ആണോ കുറയുക? We will be familiar with all this. I'm just checking. നിങ്ങൾ പഠിച്ചാണെങ്കിൽ എത്രത്തോളം റിവേഴ്സ്ഡ് ആയെന്ന് അറിയാൻ. ക്ലിയർ അല്ലേ? ആദ്യം ഏതാണ് കുറയുക?
Death rate അല്ലേ?
Death rate കുറയും. And the the gap between both of them leads to population explosion. Okay, so we have to identify basically two factors here, that is the nature of mortality change and nature of fertility change. അത് പറഞ്ഞായിരുന്നു. Factors influencing fertility change, factors influencing mortality change.
ഇല്ല സർ, അങ്ങനെ ഡീറ്റെയിൽ ആയിട്ട് പറഞ്ഞില്ലേ, സ്റ്റേജസിന്റെ ഫീച്ചേഴ്സ് ആണ് പറഞ്ഞത്.
Okay, I think that also need to be looked at because the basis of demographic theory is that there is socio-economic change. With socio-economic change will be happening in society. Mostly it is led by the economic changes that is happening. Economic development or society betterment economically, that would lead to different factors that is there. That's how you have this changes happening in your society. Otherwise, it would not have happened. So when economic development is happening, it is first reflected in the death rate and secondly in the fertility rate. Right, now my question is, why do you find it first happening in the death rate and with a lag happening in the fertility rate? Can you answer that? Anybody? I had just discussed that in the session before break. ചെറുതായിട്ടൊന്ന് പറഞ്ഞായിരുന്നു.
Sorry, industrialization, urbanization ഒക്കെ ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്യുന്നതുകൊണ്ടാണോ?
അതെങ്ങനെയാണ് നമ്മൾ ഈ ഒരു ഡൈവേർജിങ് ആയിട്ട് കാണുന്നത്? ഡെത്ത് റേറ്റ് പെട്ടെന്ന് കുറയും. Whereas my question is, why do fertility rate decline has a lagging period associated with it? There's a lag time, right? There's a gap between the decline of death rate and there's a decline in birth rate. So the theory is that basically demographic transition is composed of two kind of transition. The one is the mortality transition in a society, and the second one is the fertility transition. So we can basically know few things about fertility transition and demographic and death and mortality transition and the factors that are influencing these two. അപ്പോൾ അതാണ് ഡെമോഗ്രാഫിക് ട്രാൻസിഷന്റെ ഒരു ഹയർ ലെവൽ, ഒരു കുറച്ചുകൂടി ഇൻഡെപ്തിലുള്ള ഒരു സ്റ്റഡി വരുന്നത് അവിടെയാണ്. വിച്ച് ഈസ് സംടൈംസ് UPSC ആസ്ക്. കാരണം ഡെമോഗ്രാഫിക് ട്രാൻസിഷൻ നെസസറിലി ആ ട്രാൻസിഷനെ കുറിച്ച് മാത്രമല്ല UPSC ഈ ഫാക്ടേഴ്സിനെ കുറിച്ചും ചോദിക്കാറുണ്ട്. വിച്ച് ഈസ് ദി ഫെർട്ടിലിറ്റി ഫാക്ടർ, ഹൗ ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ചേഞ്ചിങ്, ആൻഡ് ദ മൊർട്ടാലിറ്റി ഫാക്ടർ, ഹൗ ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ചേഞ്ചിങ്. അത് എടുത്തായിരുന്നു, ഡിസ്കസ് ചെയ്തായിരുന്നു.
ഇല്ല സർ, അത്ര ഡീറ്റെയിൽ ആയിട്ട്.
Okay, this is something you should go in detail because Malthus's theory and Marxian theory-ക്കാളും ഏറ്റവും സിഗ്നിഫിക്കന്റ് ആയിട്ട് UPSC ചോദിക്കുന്നത് demographic transition theory ആണ്. And that theory has almost like more applicability than the other two theories, and it's more found to be more useful. So I think thoda detailed discussion is warranted on that. കഴിഞ്ഞായിരുന്നു, moved on from that part, മൈഗ്രേഷനിലേക്കൊക്കെ പോയായിരുന്നു. I think മൈഗ്രേഷനിലേക്ക് പോയെങ്കിൽ പിന്നെ ആ തിയറി കംപ്ലീറ്റ് ആയതായിരിക്കും. If she's still taking that, I don't want to interfere in that. But if a theory complete ചെയ്താണോ?
സോ മൈഗ്രേഷൻ ഒക്കെ ഇപ്പൊ സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്തു. പക്ഷെ ഈ തിയറിയിൽ ഇപ്പൊ സ്റ്റേജസ്, ആ സ്റ്റേജസിൽ എന്താണ് ബർത്ത് റേറ്റ്, ഡെത്ത് റേറ്റ് ഡിക്ലൈനും അതും പിന്നെ ഡ്യൂ ടു ഇൻഡസ്ട്രിയലൈസേഷൻ, urbanization അങ്ങനത്തെ കാര്യങ്ങളൊക്കെയാണ് പറഞ്ഞത്. ഇപ്പൊ സാർ പറഞ്ഞ ഫാക്ടേഴ്സ് ഒക്കെ അത്ര ഡീറ്റെയിൽ ആയിട്ടൊന്നും നോട്ട്സ് ഒന്നും തന്നില്ലായിരുന്നു.
Okay. See, either the numbers are very important. Maybe you have been taught about that 45, then 45 comes to 36, and birth rate വരുമ്പോഴത്തേനും death rate would be somewhere around 30, 20. ആ ഡിക്ലൈൻ ആയിരിക്കും ഉദ്ദേശിച്ചത്. So that's like again the detailing of the theory. Detailing of the theory is like okay, but we can draw that graph now. That's okay. അല്ലാതെ സ്റ്റേജസ് ഒന്നും പ്രത്യേകിച്ച് എലാബറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ വേണ്ടി UPSC ചോദ്യം അധികം ചോദിക്കാറില്ല. UPSC is not going into the details of this theory. They want to like കുറെ കൂടെ അനലിറ്റിക്കൽ ആണ്, അല്ലാതെ അതിന്റെ ഡിസ്ക്രിപ്റ്റീവ് ഫാക്ടേഴ്സ് അല്ല UPSC ചോദിക്കുന്നത്. സോ ഇഫ് യു ആർ ഫോക്കസിങ് ഓൺ ദി what you call as the different stages in the കുറെ ഡീറ്റെയിൽസ്, stages and its detail needs to be known, but അതങ്ങനെ അതിലേക്ക് സ്റ്റക്ക് ആയിട്ട് നിൽക്കേണ്ട കാര്യമൊന്നും ഇല്ല, അതിന്റെ ആവശ്യമില്ല. That's okay. So I'll just discuss the two things like how fertility transition is brought about, how mortality transition is brought about. ആ രണ്ട് കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഞാൻ പറയും. And the epidemiological transition is mortality transition is kind of more easier. So it's given by a geographer called Abdul Omran. Model is known by the name the epidemiological transition model. So basic premise is that in the early stages, stage 1 and stage 2, society is dominated by pestilence and infectious diseases. Okay, so I'll just write infectious diseases. ഇതൊരു 4 staged ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു തിയറി ആണ്, ബട്ട് ഞാനത് സിംപ്ലിഫൈ ചെയ്ത് ഒരു 2 സ്റ്റേജിലായിട്ടേ പറയുന്നുള്ളൂ. And then you have the epidemiological transition happening, and from a early stage of infectious diseases and high death rate. So you can think about what different diseases like malaria, plague, different kinds of fever, diarrhea, for Japanese encephalitis. So all these things, you look at Kerala and you look at Bihar, you can identify the difference. That's how this epidemiological transition is happening. So infectious diseases would be there, and a lot of high death rates would be there. And from that, there is a transition into a later stages. Maybe you can talk about stage 3 onwards to stage 5. You can see what lifestyle diseases dominating the death rate. Death rate is mainly characterized by not by these communicable diseases and infectious diseases that you find in poor countries, but in later stages, you are seeing more and more prevalence of lifestyle diseases, and then lifestyle diseases. Lifestyle diseases contribute in. You can say cancer, diabetes, diseases like that, old age. The diseases are that. So this kind of a transition is happening. So in a stage 1 country, stage 1 society, you would be seeing stage 1 and early stage 2. You will see that it is dominated by infectious diseases. Take the case of Bihar. You will see every year some kind of diseases, some kind of like what people die mass deaths because of disease happening, right? But that situation is not so prevalent in the case of Kerala. We have moved, and it is not so prevalent in the case of other more developed countries. So they have moved from what? Then you can talk about obesity, right? Cholesterol, all these diseases. But those diseases are not as deadly as the infectious diseases are. Infectious diseases will cause mass mortality, whereas these new kind of ones, in lifestyle diseases, will reduce the mortality, will be at a lower level. Now, when you talk about COVID, we can always say that the resurgence of infectious diseases, we can say mortality reversal. Okay, because COVID is not supposed to happen in a developed country, because we have eliminated infectious diseases, or we have not eliminated per se, we have reduced the role of infectious diseases. And in that context, COVID or zoonotic diseases, the rise of zoonotic diseases raises the threat of mortality reversal. So ഇതാണ് theory. അത്രയും കാര്യമുള്ളൂ, നമുക്കൊരു മെൻഷൻ ചെയ്യാം. An added element ആണ്, where you can mention that the transition from infections to lifestyle diseases form, and that forms the crux of what this steep decline in death rate in a society in demographic transition. So it can be explained through what the low branch epidemiological transition model. And കുറച്ചുകൂടെ 3-4 stages ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ട്. But pestilence, then infectious diseases, then you talk about lifestyle diseases, then you talk about what reversal of mortality. അത്ര നമുക്ക് പോകണ്ട, നമുക്ക് ഈ ഒരു ബേസിക് പ്രിമൈസ് അറിഞ്ഞിരുന്നാൽ മതി. ജസ്റ്റ് ഒന്ന് എഴുതാം. ഹ്യൂമൻ ഹിസ്റ്ററിയുടെ കുറച്ച് കാര്യങ്ങളുണ്ട്, പക്ഷെ അത് ഞാൻ ഡിക്റ്റേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നില്ല, കുറെ സമയം എടുക്കും. We'll start from Abdul Omran's epidemiological transition model provides Abdul Omran's epidemiological transition model provides a useful framework to understand mortality transition. Useful framework to understand mortality transition. Mortality transition കുറിച്ച് ചെറുതായിട്ട് സൈഡിലൊന്നും നമുക്ക് എഴുതി വെക്കാം, അത് കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് കണ്ടിന്യൂ ചെയ്യാം, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നിങ്ങൾക്ക് കോണ്ടാക്ട് മനസ്സിലാകത്തില്ല. For most of human history, അത് സെന്റൻസ് ആയിട്ട് എഴുതുന്നില്ല, ജസ്റ്റ് ഒന്ന് എഴുതി വെച്ചാൽ, for most of human history, death rate remain or life expectancy remain very low due to infectious diseases such as plague, which was easily transmitted among the population. Later, in the 20th century, steep declining death rate was observed through the eradication of infectious diseases especially in Europe and North America. Leading to increase in life expectancy. ഇപ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് നോക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ എത്രയാണ് ലൈഫ് എക്സ്പെക്ടൻസി ഇൻ യൂറോപ്പ് ഒക്കെ നോക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ഇറ്റ്സ് നിയറിംഗ് 80. യുഎസിലാണ് ഐ തിങ്ക് ഏറ്റവും ഹയസ്റ്റ് 78 ഒക്കെ ആയിരുന്നു. സോ ഇറ്റ്സ് നിയറിംഗ് 80 ആയിരുന്നു. But if you look at Africa is just 55, 56 or something, below 60. So they are still in the first stage of infectious diseases, whereas USA is in the late stage of lifestyle diseases with low death rate. Africa with high death rate. So our context bracket side area. So Abdul Omran's epidemiological transition model provides a useful framework to understand such mortality transition. Improvement in housing, sanitation allows housing, sanitation, health facilities, etc. Allows societies to control infectious diseases. Allows societies to control infectious diseases, thus decreasing mortality and decreasing mortality rate and increasing life expectancy. Thus, he asserts that socio-economic development and modernization not only brings reduction in mortality levels and timings of death, not only brings reduction in mortality levels and timings of death, but also causes shifting also brings about shifting causes of death, shift in causes of death, shifting causes of death from infectious and contagious diseases to lifestyle diseases. Infectious and contagious disease to lifestyle disease. Okay, that's the main thing. So transition നമ്മൾ ഹെൽത്ത് കൊണ്ടുവന്നു, ഹെൽത്ത് ഫെസിലിറ്റീസ് കൊണ്ടുവന്നു, ഡെത്ത് റേറ്റ് കുറഞ്ഞു എന്നുള്ളത് മാത്രമല്ല, ഇൻഫാക്ട് വി ആർ എലിമിനേറ്റിംഗ് certain kind of diseases which has huge potential for destruction of human population or high death rate. Say if you are not eliminating something like plague, if you are not eliminating something like malaria or TB or polio, cholera, etc., you will be still having that potential of or risk of high death rate. But it is the fact that through these socio-economic development, we are eliminating some of these. Like we say, we are cholera free, we are TB free, we are polio free, we are malaria free country. So you are eliminating causes of death which has like mass scale, large scale death cause ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്ന diseases നമ്മൾ ഒഴിവാക്കുകയാണ്. അതുവഴിയാണ് we are bringing in this transition. But if you are saying that you are bringing in health facility and these threats still survives there, you look at Africa, you have Ebola, you have HIV, and all these diseases still causing huge amount of death rates, right? And COVID, of course. So the transition that we are talking about in demographic transition is not just a transition where you give health, and because of that some health facility you are changing the death rate pattern, but rather the case is that you are fixing the underlying cause, right? It is clear from the fact that that in the mid 18th century, diseases such as clear from the fact that mid-18th century diseases such as TB, cholera, diarrhea, etc. Name a few. TB, cholera, diarrhea, plague, etc. were leading cause of death. So you have to give examples, right? Maybe you can cite the example of Black Deaths, different stages of plagues in Europe, nearly wiping out about half of the population. 14th, 15th century plague, okay, Europe in the half of population eliminated there. So our condition is possible. Like you have COVID, how much impact COVID is having is a limited scale. Okay, so talk about that. Where the leading causes of deaths. But by the late 1990s, infectious, okay, lifestyle diseases like cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases have replaced have seen it. Instead of lifestyle diseases like cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease have replaced infectious diseases as the leading causes of death in developed world. So vaccination, we are trying to eliminate certain diseases. We are successful in eliminating certain diseases. TB we have not been able to in India, but polio to an extent we have been able to, right? So just like that. So it's a leading cause of death in developing world. So according to Omran, countries occupy different stages. According to him, countries occupy different stages in epidemiological transition and progress through it at different rates. So Africa people still conditions so on because HIV has like caused humongous death, humongous loss of life in African countries. Similarly, Ebola bangers scene, right? So that is not the case with these developed countries. There is like much of like influences or infectious diseases on cardiac. And yeah, according to countries occupy different stages in epidemiological transition and progress through it at different rates. Unlike the developing world, where such transition occurred, where transition occurred over a large period of time, in developing countries, it has been in developing world, developing countries, this process has been happened in a quicker phase, as they have benefited from transfer of public health knowledge transfer of public health knowledge and medical technologies from developed world. See, to take the case of India, even we haven't always done the researches and developed the vaccines and everything. We have imported these technologies, these vaccines and everything from other countries, and we have benefited from that. Similarly, in Africa, vaccines are, although it is taking so much time, there's a delay and everything, there's vaccine inequality and everything. In fact, whatever vaccine they are getting is from the outside. They have not gone through that socio-economic process of economic development where they are developing these all things, but that process has been short-circuited or fastened through technology transfer. Thus, they have seen in the sense that thus these developing countries have seen rapid transition in mortality than in the developed world. And this in turn has affected the demographic transition. In the developing countries. So demographic transition and developed countries in developing countries. How is the demographic transition in developing countries is different from developed countries? Just a couple of words. I don't know how to answer the Boni, Dastam, Nandu. How both are different? Developing countries transition model, the transition history, number history, developing countries history, major വ്യത്യാസം. Advanced medical. No, that's not the case. That's like a major difference in the way transition model criticism ഒരു വേർഡായിട്ട് പറഞ്ഞാൽ എനിക്ക് മനസ്സിലായില്ല. സിബിൻ, യൂത്ത് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ ഒരു വയസ്സ്. See, the major difference is the period of transition. In developed countries, there were like the population explosion or the second stage lasted for about 30 years. In the developing world, it lasted for about 50 years. So the population explosion as such, explosion got elongated or for extended period in the developing world. That's why you see this issue of overpopulation in developing world, not as such in the developed world. Developed world in അവിടെ ഉണ്ടായ population explosionേക്കാളും extended period ലേക്ക്, for example, ഇന്ത്യ നോക്കുകയാണെങ്കിൽ ഏകദേശം ഒരു 1950s തൊട്ട് 2000s വരെ നമുക്ക് population explosion ആയിരുന്നു. ഒരു 50-year period roughly speaking നമുക്ക് കാണാൻ പറ്റും. And the reason was that social development was lagging behind the medical revolution. മുമ്പേ ഒമ്രാന്റെ മോഡലിൽ കണ്ട കാര്യം നമ്മൾ പഠിച്ചു. അതായത് transition was rather quick compared to the വെസ്റ്റിലൊക്കെ സംഭവിക്കുന്നത് എന്താണ്, ഈ മെഡിക്കൽ ഫെസിലിറ്റീസ് ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്ത് വരുന്നതും സോഷ്യൽ ക്യാരക്ടറിസ്റ്റിക്സ് മാറി വരുന്നത്. ഏതൊക്കെ സോഷ്യൽ ക്യാരക്ടറിസ്റ്റിക്സ് ആണ് നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത്? സോഷ്യൽ ക്യാരക്ടറിസ്റ്റിക്സ് മാറി വരുന്നതും ഏകദേശം ഹാൻഡ് ടു ഹാൻഡ് പ്രോസസ് ആണ്. ബിക്കോസ് ദേ ആർ ഡെവലപ്പിംഗ്, ദെയർ എക്കണോമിക് കണ്ടീഷൻസ് ആർ ചേഞ്ചിങ്. സോ ബോത്ത് ആർ ഗോയിങ് ഇൻ ഹാൻഡ് ടു ഹാൻഡ്. ഓൾമോസ്റ്റ് ലൈക്ക് ചെറിയൊരു ഗ്യാപ്പ് ആണുള്ളത്. പക്ഷെ നമ്മുടെ ഇവിടെ ഹെൽത്ത് ഫെസിലിറ്റി വന്നു, വാക്സിൻ ഒക്കെ ഫ്രീ ആയിട്ട് കിട്ടി അല്ലെ, പോളിയോ വാക്സിൻ കിട്ടുന്നു, അങ്ങനെ നമുക്ക് ജനിക്കുമ്പോൾ തന്നെ 5-6 വാക്സിൻസ് ഒക്കെ ഉണ്ട്. To a great extent that has percolated to the local areas through immunization programs and everything. But at the same time, the developments of economic development has not reached to the different stratas of society. And because that is lagging, social development is also lagging. And similarly, because this country is not properly industrialized, the traditional aspects like caste system, religious, dominant, the attitude against contraception, all these things are still there. Early marriages are still there. Although we speak a lot about India, we know like the child marriage relevance is very high among Indians. So that all are going to contribute to. So that changes has not exactly come about. That change I don't want. And that's why fertility rates are still high in India. Okay. So one thing is that demographic, okay. Mortality transition was fast, was rapid, but fertility transition has lagged behind. Next slide. Any doubts? Okay. So you have to integrate. Demographic transition is an important topic. So you have to study that in depth. ഇപ്പൊ എന്തുകൊണ്ട് ട്രാൻസിഷൻ വരുന്നു എന്നുള്ളത് പറഞ്ഞത്, എന്തുകൊണ്ട് ഇന്ത്യ ട്രാൻസിഷൻ നീണ്ടുപോകുന്നു, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ആഫ്രിക്ക ട്രാൻസിഷനെ നടക്കുന്നില്ല. For that you have to find reasons. Okay. Now another model which I slightly briefly I want to discuss is the fertility transition model, or factors determining fertility. So this is by Hugh Jones. Hugh Jones fertility model. So he is saying there are primary factors which are influencing population, fertility variation, and then there are secondary factors. In fact, these secondary factors are responsible for how primary factors are going to work. ഞാൻ again simplify ചെയ്താണ് പറയുന്നത്, കൂടുതൽ ഡീറ്റെയിലേക്ക് പോകുന്നില്ല. Okay, so primary factors like exposure to intercourse, second one conception, that is being pregnant, third one pregnancy outcome, Fourth one, variations in fertility. This live births. These all determine the fertility rate in a society. See, ഇതിനൊക്കെ പിന്നെ extra factors ഉണ്ട്. For example, what you call as exposure to intercourse is determined by age of marriage, monogamy or polygamy, you can say, and other factors like divorce and its frequency, culture of abstinence is there. So conception കാര്യത്തിൽ നമുക്ക് നോക്കുവാണെങ്കിൽ contraception എത്രത്തോളം എത്രത്തോളം relevant ആണ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ you can say sterility. Sterility, you can talk about it here. Sterility, infertility, okay, എന്നതിന് കൂടുതലാണ്. And live births, and there like death rate, neonatal death rate എത്രത്തോളം വരും, health facility, abortion, the pregnancy outcome നോക്കുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് we can look into the factor of abortion. So ഇങ്ങനെ lot of reasons are there which are responsible for fertility rate in a society. Now these factors are influenced by socio-cultural factors, like you can talk about education, you can talk about social security, you can talk about secularization, women empowerment. Okay, yeah, that would be enough. About economic development and the standard of living. So all these factors are, so secondary factors are influencing the primary factors, and that primary factors are determining death rate, fertility rate in a particular society. Now, if you look at it, how exposure to intercourse is changing. Okay, so in a primitive society, or rather in a developing society, what you call as age of marriage would be very low. And when the society develops, education is more education, more women empowerment, age of marriage will be coming down, and that will reduce exposure to intercourse and reduce chances of conception. Similarly, monogamy, polygamy, when there is polygamy, which is mostly practiced in underdeveloped countries, primitive society, when we transition from polygamy to monogamy, again exposure to intercourse decreases. Now that's a function of education, social security, secularization, all these things. When women empowerment happens, usually polygamy goes away. Similarly, then it comes to conception. Now, when you are using more contraceptives, chances are that consumption would be very, very low. In fact, that is one of the biggest changes that has happened. Contraception, the use of contraception has drastically reduced it has differentiated sex from child, reproduction. That difference has been made. So contraception, different type of contraceptions are there. Besides, you can talk about sterility. With development, more work stress, more environmental stress, you will have less and less or more and more sterility or infertility coming in. Okay, sterility and infertility will be increasing. That issue will be there. So again, chances of conception decreases. Pregnancy outcomes, a huge one is abortion. Abortion is a big game changer. I don't call it game changer, but you can say what a factor as far as birth rate is concerned. Again, that is a function of socio-economic development. More education of economic development, career oriented, you look at pregnancy and child as like you postpone it, you abort it, kind of things happen, right? So fertility and divorce is a function of all these things, and that's how it happens. So you can say the socio-economic factors, you framework use here, and then you can explain how fertility is changing. But all these things takes time. When you look at the secondary factors, for example, education, it's not necessary that despite you having economic development, there is enough educational transition that is happening. If you look at Middle East and countries like that, you will see that very rich, but fertility rate is still high because what? That transition of social nature has not actually resulted. For example, secularization is low. When the hold of religion is more, for example, Christianity, Hinduism, or Islam, when it all talks about more and more, reproduction. So when that hold is strong, obviously these primary factors will also be slowing down. That transition will be slow. Education, women empowerment. If women empowerment is not there, you will consider women to be as baby makers, and then again, this fertility will be very high. So it's a function of these secondary factors. All right, മനസ്സിലായോ? You can explain all these things like you framework വരയ്ക്കുക, then you can explain. So education, social secularization എങ്ങനെയാ influence ചെയ്യുന്നതെന്ന് ഞാൻ പറയേണ്ട കാര്യമില്ലല്ലോ. Another idea you can use is that social capillarity. ആർസി ഡുമോണിന്റെ ഒരു തിയറിയാണ്. ഐ തിങ്ക് ഇത് പഠിപ്പിച്ചു കാണും. പോപ്പുലേഷൻ പഠിപ്പിച്ചപ്പോൾ social capillarity theory പഠിപ്പിച്ചു കാണും. So social capillarity can also be used to explain that idea. Okay, get me? ഞാൻ ഡിക്ലെയർ ചെയ്യേണ്ട കാര്യമില്ലല്ലോ. ഹലോ,
സാർ ഒന്ന് റഫായിട്ട് പറയൂ, ഓർക്കുന്നില്ല.
എന്താ ഓർക്കുന്നില്ല?
അല്ല, അത് ഓർക്കുന്നില്ല, ഒന്ന് റഫായിട്ടൊന്ന് പറയാം.
റഫായിട്ട് ഡിക്റ്റേറ്റ് ചെയ്യണമെന്നാണ് ഉദ്ദേശിച്ചത്.
അല്ലല്ല, ചെറുതായിട്ട് അതിനെ കുറിച്ച് ഒന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു.
Yeah. So you understand these two situations, like where we started from. We have a demographic transition, the high stationary stage 1, where you have the society is very poor, underdeveloped stage, very a primitive society, where what do you call, you have high birth rate, high death rate, and everything. And suddenly you can see because of some factors that there arises changes. In fact, change has been very recent phenomenon. If you look at human history, till 18th century there was nothing. We've been in that stationary stage for long. Like, death rate and birth rate remain the same and everything. But after industrial evolution only we started having these changes. So in fact, the idea of demographic transition is a very new thing that happened only after the industrial revolution in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. It started in Europe, and now this thing, a population is always controlled by three factors. One is fertility, that is one is birth rate, one is death rate, and the other one is migration. So in migration, we are just keeping this away from migration part. You have these three factors that is controlling the population of a particular society. Now in this society, transition is basically happening in the form of birth rate transition and death rate transition. In fact, demographic transition is a function of these two plus socio-economic transition. So three kind of transition can be happening in a particular society, what we call as demographic transition. So fertility transition is happening, birth rate transition, death rate transition, and the third one is socio-economic transition. It's also a cultural factor, not the numbers, but it's the ideas, the philosophies, the ideologies, all these things are also changing. So that is also a very significant part of demographic transition, socio-economic transition. Now we had looked into two aspects, rather three aspects of it. That is, first thing is the mortality transition, nothing much to do with the socio-economic one. You are introducing better public health initiatives, better public health policies. That brings in what medical interventions, which reduces the quantum of death that is happening in a particular society. So we are seeing the Omer's model where you are talking about infectious diseases being replaced by lifestyle diseases, and that disease is not just declining the rate of death declines, the time scale of death declines, and the causative factor in fact is being eradicated. So it's kind of, you can say, mostly an irreversible thing and everything, but sometimes you see like COVID kind of things are happening. It is a death rate, the death pattern has been reversed, but not in a huge manner. So death rate reacts faster in a more the first reacts first to the changing conditions, and obviously that change will push the society into demographic stage 2. But the other factor, that is birth rate, is not that it does not react that easily to changes in society. So you will see what the socio-cultural factors have huge significance as far as primary factors of, or rather, the fertility decline, birth rate decline, or changes in fertility is pretty much a function of social change. It cannot be imported, right? It cannot be imported just like you import medical facility. Now, fertility is again determined by several factors. You have the primary factor, you have the secondary factor. Now, in primary factor, obviously, the process of baby uh, new birth is controlled by several factors. It starts with your opportunity to have sex. Obviously, that's the basic need of human beings to have produce children. We cannot produce otherwise. So, how often you are going into intercourse? That's the first part that determines the birth rate, obviously. And second one, if that is leading to conception, if you are getting pregnant, that's very significant. If you are having intercourse and if you're not getting pregnant, again, that's not going to affect the population demographic factors as such. Now, after conception, you need to look at what is the outcome of this pregnancy, and then pregnancy outcome to live birth, how much of live birth you are getting. That's basically the function of fertility, right? Fertility rate. Now, these factors are influenced by the socio-economic, social changes, rather, you can say social changes that are happening there. Now, socio-cultural changes, when you talk about education, education brings all around changes. So education is there, social security is there, secularization is there, different factors are there. And all these factors would be having, these secondary factors are in fact what determines the primary factors, how primary factors are working. Now we can take a couple of examples. So you are looking at education. You are educating your children more. So obviously when you are educating your children more, your tendency to marry them at child marriage would be less. So when you are getting pregnant in age 14, you'll be having more children because your fertility would be high. You can have children from 14, 15, you can have children. So 14, 15, if you are having children for like what, every year. I was talking to one of my friend who went for village visit. She's in IRS. Village visit Nepal, Uttar Pradesh borderland. And she was shocked to see this lady with 20 children. Okay. Still living in India. So she was talking to me about you cannot relate with the fact that sometimes you cannot understand these people, how they live. And she was saying, like, ഈ ചേച്ചിക്ക് 20 പിള്ളേരുണ്ട് ആകെ ഉണ്ടോ 45 വയസ്സാണ് and 45 years she has 20 children. Like I don't think we can relate with that much. Even I heard about our grandparents and everything. Usually we hear about 12, 13 you hear. But 20, if you are marrying somebody in 25 years, you cannot basically have 20 children. Like, by the time you will be you will be having a time period of 20 children, you will be well past menopause and everything. So you will be not be able to have children. But if you are marrying a child in a 14th age, you can guess the number of children that will be there. So much number of children would be there. So age of marriage is a big deal. Now, age of marriage is influenced by education, social security. Social security is there. You are more rich, you can afford to live in a peaceful manner. You will be, the age of marriage will be rising up slowly. Secularization, religious control over these kind of things will change. Now, often in some certain communities, you see religious factors is being religious doctrines are used to justify. So when you are going for secularization, you see that trend will go down, right? Women empowerment, obviously when women are going to study into schools, they want to work. When you are in UPSC, you will not see people getting married in 21 or 22 or 23 or 24. So that's a huge factor. Economic development, social capillarity, all these things matter. So similarly, just like age of marriage, polygamy is also affected. If women empowerment is there, women will not allow like what people to men to marry like whatever they want and move on just like that. That won't be possible. And when polygamy decreases, your you know exposure to intercourse decreases and things like that. So divorce, all these things matters in that. So divorce reduces what the propensity to have children. Abstentionship is something like a small factor. Then consumption, obviously in contraception is not possible in a society which is so like conservative or backward. Or I would say backward, I would say traditional. Because traditional society, like contraception is not easy. People will not accept contraception. So for that also you need a kind of certain social change for that condom, all these ideas to be accepted. You cannot even go and buy condom from a shop without getting ashamed or without getting ridiculed. So how do you gonna go about contraception? No, you are not gonna do that. And you have beliefs that contraception is against God's will and everything. So secularization comes in. So you will not use that. Right. So how can you reduce consumption? Right. So that is again a function of the secondary factors that are controlling. And secondary factors are the socioeconomic factors that are controlling the birth rate. So that becomes important. Now, what we are thinking is that this thing, secondary factors, it's not that the change in secondary factors is not that quick enough. Now, what happened in Europe is that the development was like gradual one. So people moved from rural to urban areas. New kind of ideas developed. Individualism flourished, and people, the thoughts of people has changed a lot. But in India, when we see our economic development, that's more like the rural-urban debate is very significant. Rich-poor debate is very significant. So the modernization, as such, you say, the industrialization or economic development, as is not specifically leading to social changes, or rather, there's a delay, there's a lag in that change happening. So when that that changes is more gradual, you will see that it takes more time, and that results in what? When that delayed transition will result in 10 plus or 20 plus years of high growth rate. That leads to overpopulation. So these two factors you need to clearly understand. Then only you will understand the intricacies of the demographic transition model. Just understanding that the stages is like that's a descriptive regional geographic chemistry. So you need to understand the premises and the concept working behind that. All right. Cool. Okay, no? Now integrate this one with the demographic transition theory and you'll be good to go. So we'll take the lunch break. It was supposed to be 12:30, right? 12:30 to 1:30. So we'll make it we'll meet back in 2 o'clock. So around 2 o'clock. Okay. I have to figure out which topic to take now. Yeah, so we'll assemble by 2 o'clock. Yeah, have lunch. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.